Good morning and welcome to the 2018 PPMD, or Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy Conference. We are live streaming this morning, so all of this, and people around the world, we have about 50 or 75 online watching. So your questions will also be answered and be streamed. And how we're going to work is we're going to run through these first talks, and then just before the break, we'll do Q&A. So I think that'll be the easiest way, and the second session will be the same on education and psychosocial issues, and then we'll have questions just before. So I'm going to begin. I'm Pat Furlong, and I was one of the parents long ago who said maybe we can do something in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And it's been quite a long time, but I think we're making great progress. So this is my family. These are the Furlongs. You can see here I had a 2 and a 4 and a 6 and an 8-year-old. I had a reluctant toddler, and this was Halloween. 2 princesses and vampires and a reluctant toddler. It was just after this that both of my sons were diagnosed with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So you're here, not by choice, I know, although this isn't a bad place to holiday. I know that today wasn't your day to come to a conference by choice. But hopefully you'll leave this conference with some information, with new knowledge, and with a great deal of hope, as you see this field has progressed incredibly well over the past years. And I'm expecting and assuming that it will accelerate in these next few years, and we will see remarkable treatments for every young man and some women who are diagnosed with Duchenne. So this is a parent cycle, and I think we've all been through this as parents. You get this diagnosis. Some of us go to Dr. Google to see what happens, and usually when we go there, our heart kind of sinks. We then find a place for good care, a hospital or university nearby or even distant. Some people travel hundreds of miles and thousands of miles to see good care, and hopefully that will change over time. And then we identify what treatments are going to be good for our son at this time in his journey through this disease. And then we think about how to apply those, and we look at the benefit risk of those. How do they affect him? What do they improve? And what are the risks that we're taking by using those treatments? By default, we become the advocates because we don't have a choice on this, right? We have to educate our families, our extended families, the school, anybody we meet who says, I've never heard of this word Duchenne muscular dystrophy, or sometimes you encounter someone who says, well, he doesn't look sick, I think he's just fine. And then you find yourself talking about the genetics of this disease and educating people all around you. So by default, we as parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and sisters, we're all going to be advocates for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And this is why we're here. We're here together because this is an ecosystem, and it's not just us alone. We're surrounded by many others. And as you can see, it takes a village. So no single person, no single organization, no single company is going to fix all that needs to be fixed here. So we're in this together. I think we're a good community. I think when you leave, you'll find yourself in a new family, and a good one, and one that really is actively engaged in changing the world of Duchenne. So here's what you can expect. You're going to be connected to other families. You're going to see lots of young men and children here. We had one last night who was showing us his belly all night, which was the cutest thing ever. So you're going to find families. You're going to I think this will really melt your heart when you meet other people, that you won't feel isolated or alone. You'll feel like you belong, and you do. You're going to meet researchers here, people who have spent their lives and their careers really driving change in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. You're going to meet physicians who care for children with Duchenne muscular dystrophy and young adults, and you'll hear from them directly about what they think, how they think, and what they'd like to achieve. And then you're going to hear from companies as well. We're really lucky, and I think lucky is a hard word to say in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, because I think you'd all say, not so lucky, right? But at the end of the day, when my boys were diagnosed, there wasn't a single company that was in the space or even interested. And when I'd ask questions, they'd say, we're never, ever going to be in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So today we have more than 46 companies and growing with an interest in treating this disease. So I think that that's pretty terrific and a landscape change. So you're going to hear from these companies and see what they're doing, understand what they're driving for, and then we as an ecosystem are going to take advantage of those trials, the treatments that are approved, and then get them covered by insurance. So what are you going to learn about care? The care considerations or standards of care in Duchenne muscular dystrophy were first published in 2010. There is recently in January, the next iteration of those care considerations were published. So you're going to learn what is the standard of care, what should I expect from my physician and my clinic, and what other subspecialists should I be seeing or should my son be seeing. We have a program called Certified Duchenne Care Centers, and Kathi Kinnett will be speaking about those certified centers. This is a program really to establish who gives the best care, do they adhere to the standards of care, and there's a process to determine whether, in fact, that particular institution can deliver the interdisciplinary care that's necessary and essential in providing optimal care. You'll also learn about questions. You know, I think when I got the diagnosis of Duchenne in our family, I didn't even know the questions to ask. I was just so overwhelmed. So I think at the end of the day, you're going to have questions. And I think answering those questions and being very specific, you'll have a growing list of questions, so you'll begin to understand what questions you need to ask. You'll learn that from other families, you'll learn that from physicians, and you'll learn that from companies. And we're not changing. Okay, you're going to see this often. And this is sort of a little spider diagram of what does this disease look like and how might you treat it. So this really takes on how well is it characterized, what could you do to treat it. In the center core where you see dystrophin restoration, cardiac, blood flow, etc., those core in red are things that are ways to really drive a treatment for this disease. Then peripherally you see other kinds of things that also contribute to that pathway. So you're going to see and hear from companies, and they'll identify what piece and part of that core they're doing and how that trial is going to be looking over time. Right now, this is our clinical trial list. You see 2 approvals at the top, Exondys 51 and Emflaza, which is deflazacort or another corticosteroid, and all of the rest of these studies are in trials in different phases. So you're going to hear from these companies and understand where they are in the process, and then how we can drive that toward approval and obviously access for all. This is what we do. So PPMD, this is our 24th conference. So our 25th conference next year is in Orlando, Florida. We started off with the idea and sort of the mixed understanding of, so we'll just fix this and we'll just raise a couple $1 million and that'll be easy. Well, it turns out that a couple $1 million isn't enough, and you need that village to raise money. So right now, between foundations, academics, NIH, CDC, companies, and everyone who's contributed, the field is about $8 billion investment in Duchenne. So long ago, when we were in front of Congress trying to pass a bill called the MD Care Act, so the Muscular Dystrophy Care Act is a piece of legislation that was passed and signed into law in 2001. It was long, long ago, but that was an inflection point to get the government institutions, CDC, Center for Disease Control, National Institutes of Health, Department of Defense investing. And their investment from then in 2001 until now has been about $700 million. So that investment, it's a pretty good fundraiser to be fair, that investment really triggered interest by companies because it fully characterized the disease. So as PPMD grew, we really looked at ourselves as having 4 pillars. They are, you can spell it either way because we do a lot of work in Washington, so everything in Washington has an acronym or you can't be there. So we look at it as race, research, advocacy, care, and education, or we can look at it as care, which is care, advocacy, and so on. So I think that's what we do because we think all of those pieces and parts are essential to drive therapies. It is not one care or one research or one clinical trial. It's all of it together that's going to drive research, clinical trials, therapies, and then access to those therapies. So the important takeaways from this meeting is if you feel overwhelmed, take a breath. The outside is beautiful. So please don't feel that we're checking admission and we're seeing who's staying where and for how long, because sometimes you just need to go out in the sunshine and get warm, or get a breath, or just clear your head. Find a mentor. Find somebody that you can connect with and ask questions. And also when you're asking questions from the podium, there is no question that's silly or wrong because we're all trying to learn here. So please feel free to ask questions and get them answered before you leave. And take it easy. You're in a beautiful environment. When I got here, I thought, wow, we should have been here long ago. Anyway, this is beautiful. Make it a time for you to learn, but also a time for you to find out what you'd like to and a time to rest. So don't forget to take care of yourself, drink water. Again, I can't say enough. This is a very hot environment, and everyone says, well, it's dry heat. Well, that doesn't make you less dehydrated, so you need to drink a lot of water. Saturday in the morning, we're going to have yoga. So I'm very biased about this. I do a lot of yoga myself, and my daughter's coming to teach it. So I think that often we sit in this crouched over position for so long, and then we get sore, or we're really concentrating on care, concentrating on all the things that life puts in front of us, and we forget to take a breath and stretch out ourselves. If you're not going to take care of yourselves as parents, you're not going to be a good caregiver for your children. So I have found that yoga keeps me a little bit less crazy than I already am, and my daughter Michelle will be teaching, so obviously the bias. I think you should spend time at the pool and smile. I think you should spend time at the bar and drink, even if it's Diet Coke. I think you should relax here. Enjoy our poster session. You're going to see lots of different posters at the poster session with things that are brewing, the things that are, not beer necessarily, but things that are coming along. And you'll be able to stand in front of those posters and ask very specific questions to the people about that poster and what it says. So please join our poster session. It's very informal. You can bring your kids. There's going to be lots there to see. And on Saturday night, we have a celebration party because A, we made it through the conference, nobody got dehydrated or sick, the children are happy, and we will celebrate on Saturday night. So that's what we're going to do, that's what you can expect. And with that, I'm going to introduce, Kevin, did he arrive? You're next, okay, right. So we're going to go through these, and then we'll have a break and questions. So right now I'm presenting Stan Nelson. Stan is a good friend. He's also a father of a child with Duchenne. He's from UCLA. He's a physician. He's really leading research with his wife, Carrie Maselli, and they're really driving the field forward with their teams at UCLA. So I'm really proud and happy to introduce you to Stan Nelson.
Thanks, Pat. So I'm Stan Nelson from UCLA. I wear a few different hats, as Pat was mentioning, and thank you all for being here and waking up relatively early. I'm going to go through genetics in a rather basic way, but just to try to get us all on the same page. That's what this next 20 minutes is about. My entry into Duchenne is this little boy in his swimsuit at 3 years of age. Actually, this is right before Dylan was diagnosed with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And probably as many of you have experienced, he was being commented on by the neighbors in our area of LA that he was going to be a linebacker because he looked so muscular. He looks like a brilliantly strong child. But he was getting weaker during this time. And even though he could sort of ride a bike when he was 6, 7, this soon passed, and his last steps were at age 13 with his mom, Dr. Carrie Maselli there. And then he transitioned to a wheelchair around age 13, and this is him on a recent hike up in the mountains of Santa Monica with his dog Kong. So you'll see him at the conference, but he's probably my major conflict of interest in all this. But I think like with all of you, this is what brings me, is what brings Carrie, my wife, into this field, and it really is a family. And I'd say one of the things that I have to be reminded of myself is it's really a marathon and it's not a sprint. We're not going to solve things instantaneously. There aren't huge shortcuts. And Pat, honestly, one of the things that's really been profoundly amazing to see over the last 14 years is the fact that you guys have had this grand vision over that time. It's really very impressive. So thank you for all your hard work. For Duchenne, in blue, we can take data from the CDC, which records age at death with the hereditary progressive muscular dystrophy, male or female, and do a very good job of interpreting from that who has Duchenne and Becker and who has all other hereditary progressive muscular dystrophies. Duchenne and Becker are the big, most common and most serious of these set of diseases, which is why it gets a lot of attention, and it also provides us a large amount of data that we can interpret. In 1986, the disease gene was cloned and identified by Lou Kunkel and his team at Harvard. It ended up being a very large gene in genomic coordinates, so it's 2.5 million bases of the 3 billion base human genome is dedicated to encoding the dystrophin gene. It's encoded by 79 exons, and it encodes a protein that's called dystrophin. So many of you already know this. The dystrophin protein has a component, the yellow is ABD, which stands for actin binding domain, and that's going to bind to the actin inside the muscle. So as muscle contracts, actin and myosin slide against each other. So the dystrophin protein actually binds to that machinery, and as the cell is contracting, it will transduce some of the force of that through a series of what are called spectrin repeats, and this is the numbers that are there from 1 to 24, like a shock absorber, up to some proteins at the cell membrane, which are in the lower part where it has Greek letters, a series of proteins within the membrane. So the dystrophin protein binds to those proteins just underneath the membrane through this orange part, which is called the dystroglycan binding domain. So my best analogy of this, the one that I like, is it's like a shock absorber on a car, with the idea being the actin binding domain might be the part that's binding to the axle, then there's a shock absorber part, which is the blue parts, which are the spectrin repeats, and then the top part is the dystroglycan binding site, or what binds up to the car. So that's important for some of the actual therapeutics along the way. So the reading frame rule was recognized just a couple years after the disease gene was identified and cloned. So in 1986, the cause of Duchenne muscular dystrophy was identified, and it was mutations in the DMD gene. It was recognized that it also caused another disease called Becker muscular dystrophy, which is typically an adult diagnosis disease and much more mild, also in the X chromosome. And curiously, sometimes very large deletions in the gene led to a much more mild phenotype, and smaller deletions led to Duchenne muscular dystrophy phenotypes. That's a bit of a paradox, and that was resolved with this reading frame rule, which is about 95% true. So the man on the right actually has Becker muscular dystrophy and is still standing into his 60s, and the boy on the left, that's Dylan again, stopped walking at age 13. And they have very similar mutations, but subtly different. So what does the reading frame rule mean? So this, you're going to get genetics 101 now. So this is the genetic code was figured out in the 1960s, and it translates, and every single species on the planet uses the same code. It's completely universal. So there's some slight modifications to that, but the genetic code translates DNA and RNA sequence into protein sequence. So this simple table lets you look at any RNA sequence, and if you're a TTT, then you will put a phenylalanine. If you're in, go to the lower right-hand corner, if you're a GGT, you'll be a glycine. Or if you're a GGG, you'll also be a glycine. 3 of these are dedicated to stop codons. They're indicated in red, TAA, TAG, and TGA, but the rest encode an amino acid, which would be part of the protein and the building blocks of the protein. So gene structures and sequences are not necessarily simple. So when genes first started to be able to be cloned and identified in the 70s and 80s, we thought, one gene, one location, you just start a gene, you'd read through it, you'd make that into RNA, and then you'd make that into protein, and you'd end. It's got to be the way it looks. It's not at all like that. And genes are wildly more complex. There can be genes inside of genes, there can be genes going this direction, and inside that gene going the opposite direction. There can be a gene that starts over here and ends on the other side of another gene. Very complex, and that's just what the genome is. It's just what nature and evolution have done. This is the simplest sort of view of that. So a given gene is typically made of exons. So exons are the protein coding part of the genome. So many of you will have heard that you've got exon deletions, and that typically means that the entire exon is removed. Sometimes a deletion occurs within an exon, and that would be a small deletion, or there could be a small insertion within the exon. So in this diagram, all the exons that are protein coding are in yellow, and then introns, which are typically much larger, are in blue. All of the intronic sequence are going to be removed, but DNA gets transcribed into RNA. That transcription of the RNA includes all of the intronic sequence, so it's present. So the genome spends an enormous amount of time copying things that ultimately get removed before you make a protein. Then that is spliced and to reduce and remove all of the blue sequence. So now you have all of the intended mature mRNA, and that's what's read off exactly by the ribosomes into protein synthesis using the genetic code. Simple enough. So and that fundamentally affects all of us and our kids and what their mutations are. So there's multiple different types of mutations. About 10% of the boys have nonsense mutations, and what that means is the DNA code converted into the RNA code in blue up above. Each 3 letters encodes 1 amino acid, so you can read that across. If at the 4th position of a glutamine, the CAG of the C is changed to a T, that's then a TAG for that codon. That's a stop codon. Our term for that is a nonsense mutation or stop codon. So that's one type of mutation. That one's actually critically important because there actually is a therapy for that. It's not FDA approved in the United States, but is available in Europe. It's available in the US on some clinical trials, and that's PTC 124, Adalimumab, or Translarna. One of the things that I reflect on as a geneticist at UCLA is I often use Duchenne as an example of precision medicine. We now, in clinic, need to know the exact sequence, the exact mutation of every child with Duchenne, because that information leads us to novel therapeutic ideas, but also it has very practical ramifications of therapeutics that are needed right now. A second type of A second type of mutation, probably nobody in this room has this, but this is a missense mutation. So in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, a missense mutation would mean one of the amino acids, in this instance a his or histidine, got converted to a proline by a one base change, always a substitution, which is a one base change, and an incorrect amino acid is at that position. In some diseases, this can be critically important and is absolutely the cause. It's very rarely the cause in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and there's a vast number of missense mutations in the genome. So it's pretty rare that this is the cause of Duchenne, but it does happen rarely. Small insertions or small deletions will change the reading frame, typically to cause Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And this is the reading frame. So this is a theme that you'll hear for a number of the therapeutics. So in this example, it's histidine, 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 histidine. And in the lower sequence down below, if you remove, actually in this instance, if we insert a single A, it's CAT, 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 then the next three-letter code, the sequence doesn't know that it's supposed to shift it over, so it doesn't, so it reads it as ACA. Then every other CAT is now incorrectly read as TCA forever. And so it frame shifts and makes an incorrect protein sequence every position past the frame shift. Often this leads to a nonsense mutation or stop mutation and a truncation of the protein soon after wherever the frame shift occurred. These are actually always pathogenic and almost always lead to Duchenne muscular dystrophy phenotype. The same will happen, exactly same idea of a deletion. So if you took one if you took one letter out, you'd shift. If you took two letters out, you'd shift. So the final category of mutation, which is often a subject of discussion, is splice site mutations. So these disrupt reading frame almost always, but we don't necessarily always look to prove that they indeed disrupt reading frame. So these are the last two bases and the first two bases of every single intron are critically important for splicing. The cell machinery needs those to say, I'm an exon, let's get together and join. If either of those first two bases or last two bases of every exon are altered at all, splicing is not normal. And usually this will be an out-of-frame mutation. There's a variety of ways that the message could actually look at the end of the day. Sometimes these mutations can be a little bit deeper, so we would consider as possibly pathogenic mutations that are within the last, within 10 bases of the exon. Not all of those are necessarily pathogenic, though. So genetics 101, the quick summary is DNA encodes the genes. It's what we inherit. It's what we pass on. They're transcribed to RNA. RNA is translated into protein. The missing or mutant protein is almost always the problem. Not entirely. There's always exceptions to everything, but that's the 99% rule. There's actually over 5,000 different rare diseases already identified. There's thousands more to find, and Duchenne is one of the more common rare genetic diseases, shockingly enough. DMD gene is on the X chromosome. It's mutated in 1 out of every 10,000 cell divisions. That's sky high relative to typical genes. It's about 10 to 100 times higher. What that translates to is almost everybody in this room will have a new mutation. And that means that either the mom is a new mutation, or a mom in the family is a new mutation, or the child themselves is a new mutation. Most families coming to clinic fit that pattern, and it's because of the very high mutation rate. And because it's on the X chromosome, when it's on a boy, they don't have a backup chromosome, so boys are affected. So it's an X-linked recessive disease. Moms can be carriers. A mom may not be a carrier and can still have a child with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and there's a very large number of families that fit that mode, and that's a de novo mutation in the child. In every family, the typical family, this is actually from a paper, the pedigree up above, in dark is an affected individual, and open means they're unaffected. Circle is a female, square is a male. This is a pretty typical family, and I'll bet most of you, if you sort of looked at your families, would look actually very much like this. There's one boy affected in the family. No other sisters seem to be affected. No other uncles seem to be affected. No other male offspring from the other females in the family seem to be affected. This is because of the fairly high mutation rate in this gene. An X-linked recessive disease, it was obvious that it was because there were other families which had very clear transmission through the X chromosome, and that would be manifested down below where only males are affected, and it's always transmitted through a female relative. So this tells us a lot of information in terms of giving back clarity of genetic information back to families. So the DNA mutations can absolutely predict disease severity. It's one of the most critical things we can and should do, and we often are faced with an issue of a de novo mutation, potentially in a child who we don't have much information about. So the general rule is if it's out of frame or a nonsense mutation, we would presume that it's going to lead to no dystrophin protein at all and would be typical of a Duchenne muscular dystrophy phenotype. That's true for a nonsense mutation, a splice site mutation, a frame-shifting small indel, a large deletion or a large duplication if they lead to an out-of-frame mutation. On the flip side, most of the others that are in frame will result in some functional dystrophin protein and a more mild phenotype, and we might call that Becker, and it might actually be quite mild. So those are critical distinctions, and there's a huge impact of mutations in this gene. Mutation type across the world is very similar. It's fundamentally related to sort of the fragility of this region of the genome that leads to the mutational spectrum. It's the same everywhere that we look in the genome. There's severity can also depend on the mutation type, and this becomes more and more evident over time. The very first part of the gene, there's 95% of the time, the reading frame rule applies. So if you're an out-of-frame mutation, Duchenne, in-frame mutation, more likely to make some protein and be Becker. 95% of the time, that's right. The places where it falls apart are typically at the beginning in the actin binding domain, and actually at the very end, past the dystroglycan binding domain as well. And in those regions, you can have violations. So a violation that's common is actually an exon 3 to 7 deletion or duplication, but particularly deletion should be out of frame. But here's a plot from Duchenne Registry, which you'll hear more about in a moment, where individuals with exons 3 to 7 deletions, which should be out of frame, often make a fairly large amount of dystrophin protein, and indeed are ambulating, as indicated by the pink line up there, longer than we would have expected for typical Duchenne. And we can make those inferences. So often people ask me about, do you need a muscle biopsy? And the reality is you don't need a muscle biopsy to diagnose Duchenne muscular dystrophy most of the time. So usually the answer is no. There's a variety of reasons why I like to get them for research purposes, and they might guide some subtleties in terms of how we treat with therapies as well. But situations where it may be recommended, and some of you may fit into this category, sometimes we don't find the mutation. Actually, a couple % of the families go through all sequencing. They have deletion duplication, they have a microarray done, they have sequencing done, they go get exome done. We can't find the mutation. This happens. And in those instances, it's sometimes a deep intronic mutation. It can sometimes be a very subtle chromosome translocation. There's a variety of different mutation types, which are all completely unique, and we need to have muscle sample to actually figure out what the cause of mutation is. So in those instances, a muscle biopsy is actually imperative because it can lead to finding the exact DNA mutation. The DNA mutation can then allow you to do appropriate testing within the family. And then the other, I would say, is if somebody's having a really profoundly different disease course, I think they deserve to have a muscle biopsy. Needle biopsies are perfectly adequate for this purpose, in my opinion. I'll comment here on a few of these individuals. So on the left is an individual who was diagnosed with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, but he actually is self-correcting in a very interesting way. So he has islands, the little clump of cells. I'm not sure I get to point here. I can't point with a pointer, can I? Yeah, I'll wave my hand. The one on the left, there's sort of a grape-like cluster of cells. The brown stain is dystrophin. This boy should have no dystrophin. He has a frame-shifting mutation, but some mechanism is allowing him to make dystrophin. He shouldn't, but he does. And it would be great to figure out what that mechanism is. He's actually having a clinical course that's a little more mild than we would have expected, which is the reason we did the muscle biopsy on him. This allows us to study those really interesting kids in more detail. The child in the middle is a child with exon 3 to 7 deletion. He should make no dystrophin whatsoever because he has an out-of-frame protein, but a large portion of these individuals with exon 3 to 7 sometimes have Duchenne, sometimes they have Becker muscular dystrophy. And for him, he was diagnosed around 12 or 13, which is a little late for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and he indeed makes dystrophin protein throughout his muscle and has a bit more of a mild dystrophic phenotype. And the person on the right is a more typical Becker muscular dystrophy patient who is a male who had an inadvertent diagnosis because his daughter had intellectual disability and he got a microarray done. They found a carrier status of an exon 50-51 deletion, and his muscle biopsy shows good muscle protein and really mild muscular dystrophy in him. So my final comments are just keep in mind, so Duchenne muscular dystrophy is a very clear phenotype, but as you guys discuss amongst yourself or you see other kids, there's clear phenotypic differences. And we don't necessarily always know what those are. Some of it's because of the DNA mutation in the DMD gene. Others are likely genetic modifiers. One super interesting one is LTBP4, identified by Beth McNally, and in a paper by Kevin Flanagan was shown to be a modifier of the phenotype in humans. How big it's modifying is not necessarily so clear yet. And we may want to search throughout the entire genome to search for what other genes are modifying the phenotype. So there's lots and lots of clinical trials, as Pat had mentioned, massive numbers occurring. And indeed, by bringing some of these new therapies, but also just simply coordinating care, the disease phenotype is getting more mild over time, and that makes it a little bit more difficult to look at the genetics of this disease, but well worthwhile. I'm going to put a small plug in before I jump off for Duchenne Registry. This is a critical component for us to do and interpret, and a lot of these components sort of all interweave and interlace. So as we have more Duchenne Registry data, we can do a better job of looking at genotype-phenotype correlations, severity issues, therapeutic issues. This is an example of data from Duchenne Registry several years ago where indeed deflazacort could be observed to be a superior steroid in terms of slowing the age at loss of ambulation in a broad cohort. This is, and actually still is, the largest steroid study ever done in Duchenne, and it's completely empowered by data that a lot of people in this room and from 10 years ago started to put into this registry. So I'll just leave with these comments. Thank you.
You're now all clinical geneticists, so that's good. And I think that this lays the perfect groundwork to kind of answer the question, so what about care? What should that look like? Who should I go to? Where should I be seen? And what are the components of care? So Kathi Kinnett is going to come up and discuss the CDCCs, again, another acronym, which is the Certified Duchenne Care Center programs.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here and happy to see lots of faces, and hope to give as much information as I can. So now that you've got this diagnosis, what do we do now? We push this, right? And I'm pushing, and nothing's happening. Oh, there we go. Okay. So Duchenne is a really complex diagnosis, and it requires complex integration of clinical care and the integration of you and your providers and multiple disciplines to provide the best care that we can. A care team is going to change over time. So what you need right now, early in this diagnosis, is not going to be the same, are not going to be the same people that you need a little bit later in the diagnosis, and are not going to be the same people that you need later in the diagnosis. So what we're going to focus on today is just what you need right now in an early stages of this disease, in a childhood and a new diagnosis. You need a team that works together, and as Pat alluded to and Stan discussed, we do have a network of providers across the country who are part of an infrastructure that are called the Certified Duchenne Care Centers, and those are centers across the country that are capable of providing comprehensive Duchenne care in agreement with the care guidelines that were just recently updated by the CDC. You need several subspecialties, and these subspecialties need to know their subspecialty, but it's helpful if they know something about Duchenne. It's nice if you're not the expert in the room. It's nice if you can talk to an endocrinologist who knows endocrinology and also knows Duchenne, a cardiologist who knows cardiology and also Duchenne. You can find all of those people at a certified center, and you need to find those people locally as well. So this is the diagram that's in the updated care guidelines, and if you'll notice, the most important person is in the center of this diagram, and that's your child or yourself. The next person are the parents, and you need to be the center of your care team. The care needs to go through you. You need to decide what it is that you want and what it is you don't want, obviously with input from the experts who are the subspecialists who are also on your care team. But you are the center of your care team. The care coordinator at the Certified Duchenne Care Center will be the person that helps to coordinate all of your care, is the person that you call in between appointments, who can answer questions and guide your questions to the appropriate subspecialist. That will be the person that coordinates everything that needs to happen. And then all of the subspecialists around the periphery are the subspecialists that will be involved in the care of you or your child. Those don't all need to be involved in the early stages. So what do you need right now? Right now you need primary care. We're going to go through all these just one at a time, but roughly you need primary care, you need a neuromuscular specialist, you need physical medicine and rehab and/or PT, you need a genetic counselor, and you need neuropsychology. So what does your primary care provider do? Well, that's the person who's local to you. That's the person who you're going to call if your child's got a cold. That's the person that's going to do well child checks. That's the person who's going to make sure that your child's immunizations are up to date. And immunizations and vaccines need to include annual influenza vaccine, need to include Pneumovax, as well as all the other childhood vaccinations that are required by the CDC. This person is going to manage acute illnesses. So if you've got an acute illness, you're probably not going to call the neuromuscular specialist. That person and those specialists may be involved in the management of your child, but primarily you're going to seek care from your primary care provider. This person needs to have an awareness of this diagnosis, and one of the tools that we created in cooperation with TreatNMD and the World Duchenne Organization is called the Imperatives of Duchenne MD, and it's a one-page synopsis, one-page snapshot of what Duchenne care should look like annually. If you haven't seen that, it's available on the website, and I'd encourage you to look at that. Have a copy of that for your primary care provider and keep a copy for yourself as well. Your primary care provider is also going to need to communicate with your neuromuscular specialist back and forth. So that communication needs to be both ways. Your neuromuscular care team will need to communicate with your primary care and vice versa. So an excellent line of communication that involves you as well is critical for the management of your child in this diagnosis. The neuromuscular specialist is typically either a neurologist or a physical medicine and rehab provider with an expertise in neuromuscular management. So this person is a person who has an awareness of Duchenne. There are a number of neuromuscular diseases out there. Your child has Duchenne. So the person that you want is a neuromuscular specialist who has expertise in Duchenne. It's great if they have an understanding of other neuromuscular diseases as well. It's critical for your child's well-being that the person knows Duchenne. This is going to be the person who you see every 6 months for evaluation of the progression of this diagnosis, as well as the person who's going to discuss steroids with you, different steroid regimens, as well as the person who will talk with you about approved mutation-specific or non-mutation-specific medications that are available, hopefully, for your child. This will be the person that informs you about clinical trials and should be able, again, to discuss mutation-specific therapies. This person is the coordinator of all of the specialties. The coordination is the coordinator of care, the care coordinator, usually works with the neuromuscular specialist and coordinates all of the subspecialties that are involved in the care of your child, both within your team, between your team and the primary care provider, and between your team and you. So the neuromuscular specialist and the coordinator of this team are critical. Physical therapy is also critical. Physical therapy is also going to see your child every 4 to 6 months for an evaluation, again, of progression of disease, as well as help you in the surveillance and management of your child, help you know what stages will come next, what you need to do at this stage, what assistive devices will be important. They'll guide you in stretching, so education is stretching, education around bracing, wearing ankle-foot orthosis, and Tina's going to talk much more about this than I'm going to talk about it. Positioning, posture, and support, again, equipment, any equipment that you might need, and safety and fall prevention. We see that many children come off their feet with a fall, so it's really important for us that falls are prevented as much as possible, and that you know what to look for in terms of a fall and how to manage a fall and a potential broken bone if that does occur. Genetic counselor is important, and Ann Martin is going to talk just a little bit about genetic counseling, and Stan offered much more in terms of genetic understanding than I'm going to. But it's important, as Stan said, to identify your child's mutation through genetic testing and muscle biopsies if absolutely needed, but they usually are not. Carrier testing is also something that's important. We know that moms who are carriers, females that are carriers, have an increased risk of cardiomyopathy. And so it's important that moms, females, know if they are carriers and that their health is followed sequentially throughout their lifespan in order to prevent any issues and to assist with any issues that may happen in terms of cardiac as well as skeletal muscle and any psychosocial or cognitive issues that come up. So genetic counselors are instrumental in testing moms as well as any other females that may be at risk in your families, as well as to discuss reproductive options. There are many reproductive options that families are interested in. Those are the people that can answer your questions regarding reproductive options. And then Ann's going to talk just a little bit about Decode Duchenne, which is available as a free genetic testing program for boys, and also offers now genetic testing for females. This is a picture of the Duchenne Registry team. Anne is going to speak next, and I didn't have a picture of Jen, but Jen is right there, and she directs the Decode Duchenne program. So the registry offers free access to genetic counselors for families and centers, and access to the registry as well as genetic counseling, education, and resources. Neuropsychology is also extremely important. We know that there's Duchenne in the brain, and everybody who has Duchenne is not affected by a lack of dystrophin in the brain. Some are. We see behavior issues, we see learning issues, we see an increase in autism spectrum, we see an increase in seizure activity. So neuropsychology is an important subspecialist to have in your repertoire of subspecialists for your child. They're capable of assessing cognitive delays, as well as looking to assess psychological issues and learning disabilities. So if you have a child who has any of these issues, it's important to have neuropsychology on your team. We know that in this population, there's an increased risk of anxiety and depression. Again, clearly not everyone, but there is an increased risk. So keeping that in the back of your mind, if this happens to be an issue with your child, is important. Assessing behavioral issues are also important. We see parents who say, I can deal with the physical manifestations of the disease, but the behavior issues, the learning issues, all of these things are kind of the things that drive me over the edge. So knowing if your child have these tendencies and learning how to manage these tendencies for the benefit of your child and your family is extremely important. During the first year, at some point, it's important that cardiology and pulmonary are involved. Obviously, at a very early age, there are very few children that have cardiac manifestations and not many that have pulmonary manifestations until a little bit later in the diagnosis. But having a baseline evaluation of cardiac and an annual evaluation of cardiac is important. We've seen children as young as 6 that have had fibrosis in their cardiac muscles. So it's important that there's a baseline exam and an ongoing annual evaluation. Pulmonary is important to meet the team so that as soon as your child is capable of providing pulmonary function, that pulmonary function testing can be assessed and a baseline evaluation can be obtained. Emergency care is something that's important for you all to know and may or may not be discussed at your initial visit. All of these guidelines are available on the PPMD website as well as the PPMD app. So I'd encourage you to visit that website and know what these emergency care guidelines are and know what you need to know. First of all, we offer an emergency card. I would encourage you to have one of those in every wallet and have one of those on your child if your child goes to daycare. Again, the information on that card is available on the mobile app. So download the mobile app. It's available for all manner of smartphones and has been extremely helpful when people have found themselves in an emergency situation and have not been able to get access to anything on the website, but they have the app and all the information's on the app and they just pull it out and show the emergency room staff. So I would definitely download the app. We have resources with Lawrence Hope. We have a collaboration to find medical alert bracelets and have recommended language on those bracelets. So, and those bracelets, the reason I like them is that they come in all kinds of things. They're not just girly bracelets that look all silver and gold, but they have sports bands and all kinds of things to choose from. So if you don't have a medical alert bracelet, it's probably important to, or some kind of jewelry to have that. Again, we're here 24/7. We respond to phone calls, to texts, to Facebook posts, although I am not on Facebook all the time, contrary to popular belief. So if you need me in a hurry, Facebook's not the best way to get me. But texting, calling, emailing, calling the office, they can always connect us, and we're always here to help. If we can't answer your question, we can connect you with experts. But the most important thing for you to know is that those experts are available across the country. So if I can't answer the question or I can connect you with the expert, I can connect the emergency room with an expert, I can connect your providers with an expert. So just know that these are the certified Duchenne care centers right now, and that there are over 400 providers at all of those centers, and they are happy to answer questions and help you in any way that they can. Don't forget to get support for yourself, and clearly you are here getting support for yourself, which is really important. Joining a Connect group that's close to you and in your state is important, as well as online social groups are important, but please take what you hear online with a grain of salt. There's a lot of wisdom on Facebook. Some of it we can endorse, and some of it we kind of go, So just be careful of what the take-home messages are from Facebook. You are educating yourself, and I commend all of you for being here. As Pat said, sometimes that's not an easy thing to do. So let us help you in any way that we can, and if it gets to be too much, please take a break. Don't forget to support your relationships and your partners. We have a high divorce rate in this community, and we'd like to avoid that with everybody in this room. So make sure that you don't lose yourself in this diagnosis, and you lose your relationships or your partnerships in this diagnosis. You are important. Your partner is important as your child, so please nurture those relationships. Support your children with age-appropriate discussions. We have resources online. We're happy to share those with you, and make sure that you spend time with everybody, including the children that don't have Duchenne. And don't forget to include your external family. If you can pull those resources in, get people to help you in any way they can. They want to help you for the most part, so if they want to help you, please let them. And don't forget that you're not alone. We're always here. Our care team includes myself, Pat, and Amanda, who's back there waving her hand. So if you need anything, if we can provide anything in terms of education resources, guidance, a shoulder at any time, please let us know. We're happy to help. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kathy. Next, we're going to have Tina Duong talk to us about physical therapy. I think this is one of the most puzzling things, in that we know these children get tight in their Achilles and their hamstrings and their IT bands. Also, their shoulders need to be exercised. How much, how often, how long do you hold these stretches? What's important? Just a few months back, we held a meeting on contractures, because some of these times these children develop contractures, and it can be in the home that is doing stretching frequently and long, and then the contracture develops anyway. So Tina's going to talk to you about physical therapy, what we know, what we're learning, and what we hope to do. So Tina.
Thank you, Pat. I really appreciate it. I hope you can see me above the podium. I will talk about adaptations, and I think one day I'll be a diva and ask for my adaptation to have a box, so I look more than just a box and a head. But I do really want to thank Kathi and Pat for the invitation to speak about physical therapy, and my physical therapy colleagues to allow me to represent what we do about in Duchenne, as well as early diagnosis. So I'll start with, these are my disclosures. And what's the role of PT? So there's a lot of things that we do. Here, I just put a few things. We're encouragers, instructors, educators, consultants, and advocates. And so when you're looking at these roles, you can really put yourself in these roles. What our job, there's a multitude of things that we do, but our primary job is to teach you and your family to be the best advocates. I know that Pat has said this frequently, but the best thing that we could do for you at being movement specialists is to teach you how to teach others, because taking the cup is half full approach, we get to be a family that is in a rare disease. And so being a part of that family, you get to educate everyone else who doesn't know about the disease. So we'll go through a few things. So I want to first kind of set the stage and tell you what does physical therapists, what do they do? And so according to the American Physical Therapy Association, what physical therapists do is first they examine you, and the perspective that they take is they look at your musculoskeletal health and how to best promote movement. And so they do that by doing a thorough exam, and then the intent of a lot of the physical therapy diagnosis is to figure out how you move and movement disorders, as well as reducing pain or restoring function or preventing disability or secondary conditions because of maybe some of the contractures or things that Pat mentioned. And so in PT, I'm going to talk about pediatrics because this is, we're in a group of talking about early diagnosis. So usually you're diagnosed, your child's diagnosed when they're young. And so what's the approach to pediatric PT? I think coming from the pediatric world, the fun thing about being a pediatric PT is that you get to be creative. It looks like fun, and it should be fun, because you usually don't go to a pediatric gym and see kids, doing squats or push-ups, because if that's the case, it may be the wrong gym. Because kids like to play, and the intent is that physical therapists who are specializing in pediatrics, they specialize in understanding movement, but get to be the artists of movement. And so they get to figure out how to get your child to do things that are fun and make them want to do it, because we want kids to want to be active. And so if you bring them to the gym and make them exercise their whole life, they may not have the best impression of what being active means. And so it's usually very play-based and participation-based. And so it's a dynamic interaction that has to happen between the family, the child, the environment in which this is happening, as well as how the child feels socially, physically, and emotionally. So this is a dynamic that happens and changes throughout the life cycle. And so there's a lot of collaboration. And I know we've said it many, many times, it takes a village, and it takes a really, really large village. And so beyond the family that you have, you've just gained a whole new extended family. And so at the time of your diagnosis, lucky for us, we get to be a part of your life as long as you allow us to be in there. So we work with you as well as with your care team, including neurologists, pulmonologists, respiratory therapists, speech pathologists, social workers, genetic counselors, and then outside of the clinic, we also work with your community therapists, PE teachers, schools, and this is not this is not all of the list. If you have other people, dance teachers, coaches, that you would like your physical therapist to speak to them about movement, that's what we're here for, is to do whatever it takes to help promote participation in activities throughout the lifespan. And then, of course, advocacy. I think advocacy starts at the moment of diagnosis, because one of the things that I really, really love about this community is that kids learn to advocate for themselves really well as parents. And so having the tools to arm you on teaching other people who maybe know less about Duchenne to promote independence and quality of life, that's the tools that we could best provide you. Okay, so enough about PT in general. What do we do for PTs? What do PTs do for boys with Duchenne? So first we evaluate. And so when you first come to clinic, you'll see your physical therapist, and they will look at your musculoskeletal health. So what are your muscles doing? How does it interact with your bones? And how does it affect movement? And so with this, I'll talk about some of the outcomes that will be assessed during clinic, but they'll look at strength and range of motion. And based on that, they'll make recommendations on stretching and bracing. And then also looking at balance and coordination. So for younger kids, they're gaining skills, muscle, motor coordination skills, muscle strength. And so the physical therapist will assess gross motor skills such as running, walking, jumping, getting up off the ground, stairs, those kinds of things. And that'll give them an idea of the overall fitness that your child should have. And so they can kind of give you a framework to work off of. And then, of course, promotion and participation, because kids grow not only physically from the motor perspective, but growing from the motoric perspective leads to socialization and socio-emotional health that comes along with it. How do we handhold you in that process to make sure that your child honestly gets to be a kid? Because our whole goal is to help promote your child being able to do things any other little boy gets to do. And so some of these are not limited to this small list, but it could be adapting or modifying the environment, assistive technologies, ordering of equipment or braces that may help them move and keep up with their peers. And so in a physical therapy exam, I think the important thing is to ask what and why the physical therapists, why they're doing some of the exams they're doing, because you go to a multidisciplinary clinic, the therapist may have 30 minutes to see you. And so they need to really hone in as to what's the most important thing to assess during that day. So if it's your first clinic, it may be a little bit longer because they have to have a basic understanding of the baseline of where your child is functioning from. And so you may have more of an extensive workup. It may take a little bit longer. They may do more muscle tests. They may do more time function testing and other assessments that they wouldn't do for follow-ups. And so for follow-ups, they usually do less of the muscle testing. They do a lot of the function-based testing, and then predictive testing. And so I'll talk a little bit about predictive testing that is based on research that shows time function tests that's related to loss of a function. And so as physical therapists, we use that information to help plan ahead on what may come, because with the healthcare system in which we work, if we need something, we can't order it today and get it tomorrow. So it takes a little bit of predictive planning. And then another important thing is at the time of diagnosis, you may have to make the decision of being on steroids or not. And so this one I find really helpful because it's a really emotional time. You first have gotten a diagnosis, and now the neurologist or physical medicine physician saying, well, we think you should be on steroids. And so there are a lot of side effects associated with steroids. And so what we usually do is do a baseline assessment that's extensive. So it has the strength testing as well as function testing. And then you go home, and then you have the perception of whether or not the way the risks and benefits of it, are the steroids really helping? Do you just think it's helping, or is it actually helping? What happens is you come back for a follow-up visit, and as the PT, we do the same examination, and then it gives you some objective data to give you a little bit of comfort on the decision that you made. Did the steroids help? Did it make a difference? To give you an overall picture of the before and after of of the intervention itself. And that's just a scenario or an example with steroids. It could be other interventions that could be looked at in the same way. So What are the possible outcomes in clinic? So what you'll see here that's going to be really familiar is that a lot of these assessments you'll see if your child's part of a clinical trial, a lot of these are assessments used in clinical trials. And so the function-based assessments are the ones that really look at what your child's actually doing. And so like I said, the time function test includes running or walking down a hall that's 10 meters long, timing them and watching them to see how they get up off the floor, and then climbing a set of 4 stairs. The North Star Ambulatory Assessment is a validated assessment used in boys with Duchenne, and it watches for gross motor skills such as same thing, standing, walking, running, jumping. And then the 6-minute walk test, not all clinics do that because it takes a lot of room, but basically it's just as it reads. It's 6 minutes of walking to see how far your child walks in 6 minutes. And there are some other tests that's more associated along further down the line in for looking and assessing upper limb movement. That's the PUL and the EK scale. And then as your child gets older, they'll do some pulmonary function testing. But then on the impairment side of things, looking at strength, in order to really understand movement and give appropriate recommendations, the PT will assess strength. So they'll do it either by manual muscle testing, saying pull, push against me, and give a subjective rating on how strong your child is. Or they do handheld myometry, which is a type of strength testing as well, but you use a device similar to the picture on the bottom, and the device gives a number on how strong, say, the quads or the hamstrings, depending on what they're testing, is. And so that gives you a little bit more detail about the strength itself. And then for boys who are a little bit weaker, active range of motion, which means how much can you move your hand against gravity pushing down, is also a way of assessing strength, and they may measure it using that goniometer that you see at the bottom of the screen. And so in order to fully understand movement, you have to understand the joint. And so what they also may do is assess joint motion and joint movement. So you may hear things like passive range of motion. What that means is that a person, yourself or the therapist, passively moves the arm through a motion, and then that's measured. So what it tells the therapist is how much available range the muscle has to push, pull, or produce force. And then active range of motion is how much force the muscle has, it can provide to move your arm through space. And so this kind of gives an idea for the therapist to either provide an assisted device to help move the arm through space or augment that with something to promote mobility. So why are these outcomes so important? Like I said, it provides feedback for interventions, but really primarily it helps predict the intervention, such as loss of ambulation. So you can plan for bracing, home modifications, transportation, teaching, and just so that from a social or emotional standpoint, as a family, it helps prepare the family for what may come based on some of the research that's out there. So the predictive research based on the time function tests are based on a natural history study of boys with Duchenne, and it's just a prediction of what we think may be lost within a year or so, and it's really primarily used for planning. And so that being said, you'll see this frequently too. There's stages of that's described for movement in Duchenne, and the stages are primarily based on ambulation status. So you can see 1 through 3 are the ambulatory stages, and then 4 and 5 is non-ambulatory. So we'll focus here on kind of the early stages of the time of diagnosis. So like I said, what you focus on early on is the exam, and then the initiation of steroids, and then how do the kids keep up with their peers at school. And so that being said, I think the therapist really helps with the community or school therapist to help them create a program that promotes integration into the school system, especially with PE. And so the goals include maintaining range of motion, good posture, balance, and coordination, as well as maintaining fitness. And we'll kind of generally talk about what maintaining fitness means, as well as adaptations and modifications. So, stretching. So we've had a lot of conversation about stretching, and I appreciate all the time that we've got to spend about excessively pondering over contractures and what contractures mean. If you guys want to further understand contractures, I have at the poster session, there's a few posters in which I talk in a little bit more detail about its development in boys with Duchenne and what we know about its variability. Because the truth is, boys with Duchenne develop contractures. We don't exactly know why. It could be due to positioning. It could be due to fibrosis. There's a lot of factors. Some boys develop contractures quicker than other boys. Is it because of the intervention that makes them, or lack of intervention, such as stretching or bracing, that makes them develop these contractures faster, or we actually don't know. It's a question that is out there that we're not sure, but as a movement specialist, what we do know is how to maintain healthier muscles with the background of Duchenne being there. So one of the things about stretching is, I want to emphasize, stretching has no proof or evidence that it's going to increase range of motion, but it does improve flexibility and decrease tightness. And so we all stretch for a reason. Pat loves yoga, and why do you stretch? It's because your body feels better. You feel more flexible. Your muscles can move a little bit better when it's stretched. Even though it's not necessarily increasing range, it does help with movement. And so a lot of the stretches out there, the things that you really should start with are first the heel cords and the hamstrings, because those are the first joints that will be tight. And there's a lot of positioning things you can do too to make sure you maintain that range. And then we usually initiate night splints early on. First off, they look something like this. The important thing for night splints is it holds a position for a good length of time. And there are small studies that show that it is effective in managing range of motion. The splints should be customized. And the important thing here is you're not trying to overstretch the muscle or the tendon. You want the splints itself to bring your child's foot up to a point of where the tightness is and hold it there. So, because the crucial component here is not how far you can push the stretch, but how long they can hold it in that position. So it needs to be comfortable and they can wear it at night. And then, of course, consult with your PT to make sure that the brace is set where the foot is in a nice neutral alignment, because in all this, biomechanics and good alignment is going to be very important. And lastly, the splints should be used for long-time positioning or day or nighttime use. We do not recommend AFOs used for walking because it does change the mechanics of walking, and it's not something that helps from that perspective. Here are some resources that PPMD has, as well as other sites on methodologies and ways of stretching for boys with Duchenne. And then encourage recreational activities. So this is your fitness. This is your exercise. Like I said, whatever we can do to help allow your boys to just be boys, this is our job. So in general, when we talk about exercise here, what are the benefits? So the benefits of exercise is to maintain mobility, improve endurance, function, and coordination. And it lowers the risk of secondary conditions such as bone health and obesity, or a sedentary lifestyle, or muscle atrophy. So it is, even though your boys have Duchenne, it is still, their muscles still need to work. So they have to use it in order to maintain that muscle mass. And so, of course, as we all know, we participate in activity and exercise because it's not only about our muscles, it's about our sense of well-being. And exercise does help with depression and anxiety. And then, of course, maintaining muscle mass, because you have to use it or you lose it. And then it also improves the blood circulation in the muscle itself. And so this slide, I just want to talk about benefits of exercise in healthy individuals versus individuals with neuromuscular disease. So we know that in healthy individuals, the recommendation is some kind of aerobic activity and strengthening. And it's usually 30 minutes, 5 times a week or something. But in individuals with neuromuscular disease, there's been a couple of studies that say the adaptations to exercises are a little bit different. And so a lot of the individuals with neuromuscular disease adapt to exercise similar to someone who's been really sedentary. So you have to start slow and move up. And the goals are different. The goal is not to build muscle. The goal is to improve or maximize function. prevent balance or falls, because that could lead to a young man getting off his feet, minimize pain, improve sleep, and or manage range of motion. And so with the aerobic activities, the primary thing here is that think outside the box. If your child wants to ride a horse, if your child wants to play soccer or football or baseball, it's okay. Talk to your therapist if they can help modify this so that can be possible, because team sports is important not only for motor coordination and motor growth, but also the social growth. And then strengthening. Real quick, to just make sure that you understand terminology here, we talk about isometric, concentric, and eccentric, and what is good. So you know that eccentric exercise is not something that's promoted, and I'll tell you why. So isometric strengthening is where you contract your muscles, both sides of your muscles at the same time around your joint, and there's no movement around the joint. And so that doesn't harm the muscle as much. Concentric is like, say, your biceps. If I'm looking at my biceps and I bring my hand up to my shoulder, my biceps are concentrically acting. Eccentric work is anything that helps slow or manage the quality of movement. So if I'm bringing my hand back down, there's eccentric motion of my biceps working right now. And eccentric is a type of motion that causes the most muscle fiber damage. That's why we tend to make sure that you don't do eccentric work, which includes strengthening. But the truth is, in all movement, and anytime we move, there's always eccentric work. And so to customize this, talk to your physical therapist, and they can analyze the movement pattern of different sports that you want to do and give you an idea of what to avoid and what not to avoid. And of course, there's assistive technologies and orthotics to help support this, to make sure that the body's in the best biomechanical alignment to prevent injuries in the long run, to maintain mobility. Primary thing here that I want to relay is that Dr. Ben Dixon in 2014 published a study that said for kids who are actively social in their roles as well as independent in activities of daily living, it is highly correlated with their strength and function and their ability to be independent. A lot of times in clinic, parents ask me, so how much is too much? And so this is just an example of, there's different ratings of perceived exertion scales called the Borg or the Omni that you can look up out there to kind of give you an idea and ask your son, how hard are you working? So they really should be working at a moderate pace where they still can talk. And so this is just an example of some of the scales that you can talk to your therapist about using. And then on top of it, I always suggest if you're trying to have an exercise, that intervention or activity that you're starting, do a calendar and monitor if there's extra cramping, if there's more pain, they can't sleep at night after activity, then maybe bring it back just a little bit. But that's the way of customizing it, because we actually don't have a real prescription of exact frequency, intensity, and duration at this time. I won't speak a ton about modifications of the school because Denise will speak about that a little bit more in the afternoon, but the primary thing to talk about here is to make sure that your child's well integrated into PE and the classroom. So if they need adapted PE or modifications in their seating system to make sure that they're in good posture while they're at school, that's important to talk about with the teachers. And here's some resources that PPMD does have on their website that you can take a look at that helps guide some of the issues related to education. And remember to always stretch, because the less tight you are, your body's better at movement. Stay active, doing the tasks that you like, what your kids like. And then, of course, don't ever let the lack of movement inhibit your ability to participate in something. So talk to your physical therapist. If there's a will, there's a way, and we'll use whatever we have in our toolbox to make sure we adapt the environment to make sure that your child stays mobile throughout their lifespan. Thanks.
Thank you, Tina. So we're going to now talk about data, and I think that we don't necessarily always recognize the value of data. We talk about data that Stan talked about from baseline to the change, whatever changes you can see and sometimes predict in your child. We talk about data in terms of clinical trials. We talk about data for approvals. So how do we get data? And I think as parents, we often find that we'd like to be actively involved. We'd like to do something. We certainly track in our hearts, in our minds, and every other place in our house how our son is doing. So Anne's going to talk to you about the Duchenne Registry. This is an easily accessible registry, and it's now 10 years old with quite a number of patients in it and family members in it, and it really has been very effective in many, many ways. So Anne Martin will be talking about the Duchenne Registry.
Thank you. It's nice to be here with all of you today, and great to see so many of you out there. So like Pat said, I'm going to talk with you about the Duchenne Registry. Some of you, I imagine, are new to this community and maybe don't know anything about the registry. For those of you who have been in the community for several years, I do want to point out that we just changed our name. So our old name was Duchenne Connect. We are now the Duchenne Registry. So if you hear Duchenne Connect, it's the same thing. And we also have a new website that launched in conjunction with the new PPMD website. This happened a couple months ago, but it's much easier to find our registry now. It's very cohesive with the main PPMD site, and this is just a screenshot of the homepage of the registry. And this is really, the new name and the new website are just the first of many really exciting changes coming down the pipeline for the registry, so stay tuned for more things to happen. This next picture is just a graphic I really love. It's also from the registry homepage, just showing the impact of the registry. You can see that we have now over 4,300 registrants. 113 countries are represented, and we've recruited for over 60 clinical trials now, and have multiple industry partners. So for those of you who maybe don't know anything about the registry, I do want to point out that it is a self-report registry, meaning you as the parent most of the time, or sometimes the individual with Duchenne or Becker, is actually inputting that data. So it's not a clinician-entered registry. It is for Duchenne and Becker as well as carrier females. So we very much want data on females who are carriers, so you can register yourself and even link your account with your son's account, and we can help you do that if you have questions. But like Pat said, the registry was established 10 years ago. So back in 2007, we were established. It was in conjunction with the NIH and the CDC and Emory Genetics. So we really do have a wealth of data in the registry now, a decade's worth of data that we're very excited about. So the goal of the registry when it began, and really still one of the main goals today, is to connect and educate the entire Duchenne and Becker community. So that means not only the individuals with Duchenne and Becker, but also their parents and caregivers and families, clinicians, researchers, and of course industry. So how do we do this? There's kind of 4 different areas we focus on within the registry, one being education that we can provide to you via the website or communication through newsletters or email announcements. Something else that's really important to us is our recruitment services, and I think that's really a great benefit that a lot of the parents like. Once your child is registered and the medical surveys are complete, the majority of trial sponsors do come to us when it's time to recruit, so we can search the registry to see who appears to match criteria for a particular trial, and then email you to let you know, hey, your son appears to match criteria for this trial, and this is who you contact to get more information. So I think it's a really nice feature because we do have such a rich pipeline and there are so many trials going on, which is wonderful, but also very overwhelming. So it's nice to know that, if your child's in the registry, that you'll get notified about the majority of trials or research studies. We have our genetic testing program, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. And then, of course, the core thing behind the registry is to help advance research through the data that you enter. we can then export that data and share it with researchers, qualified researchers who request access to the data. And of course, they only get de-identified data, so we're not sharing your son's name or your full address. No identifying information is shared, so it's all de-identified, but we do get several requests a year. I think just in 2017, we did get requests from 9 different institutions to export data. So the data that you take the time to enter is being used. I really want to make sure you understand that. So I'm just going to show a couple screenshots from the new patient registry dashboard. So just so you kind of will understand what you're looking at when you do go to the website, which is DuchenneRegistry.org. If you have to start a new account and you need help with that, come see me. I'll be at the registry table starting later today. But assuming if you already have an account, you would just go to the website, enter your username and password, and then this is the new patient dashboard that you'll see. On the left-hand side is a list of medical surveys that you can complete. Some of these are very short. Others take a few minutes. On the right-hand side, you'll see different modules where you can enter or upload your medical records. You can enter your medications and supplements. If you scroll a bit further down on the page, you'll see the surveys that you've completed. And once you've completed a survey, then you can view the data. When you click on View Data, you can see not only your child's data, but how that compares with everyone else in the registry. Other things along the right-hand side include entering your healthcare providers, entering growth measurements. The family members box is where you can link different family members together. Also, a box that's not visible on this screenshot is a clinical trial box. This is where our clinical trial finder tool is located, which actually pulls some information from your child's account and then can show you a list of trials that might be appropriate for your child based on their age and gender and location and all of that information. So I know Pat and I have both mentioned that we are 10 years old now and that we have 10 years worth of data, and we're actually working on a 10-year registry report, and I was just going to show a couple sneak peeks into some of that data. This first is a pie chart showing basically who is in the registry. About 3/4 of the registrants, so out of the approximately 4,000 registrants, about 76% are Duchenne. We have 7% of individuals with Becker. Another 7% are, it's still kind of unclear if they're Duchenne or Becker. And 10% of the registrant population are carriers. We have manifesting carriers, confirmed carriers who don't have any noticeable signs that they're aware of. And even women who are possible carriers, so they're not really sure if they're a carrier yet. They have registered as well. So I do want to point out that, if you are a carrier, please register yourself. Your information is very, very important. This is showing a table of the different genetic mutations that we found within the registry. This is only for the registrants who've actually submitted a copy of their genetic test report for us to review. We do ask in one of the surveys what your child's mutation is, but we also request a copy of that report that you can upload or email or fax it to us, or you can even mail it to us the old-fashioned way. But we have found, what's been found in other reports, the typical breakdown that 65% of the patients have a deletion. We found that 12.5% of patients have a nonsense mutation, about 10% have a duplication, and so on. And again, this information is so important because of all the mutation-specific therapies that are either on the market or, hopefully soon to be on the market, but currently in trial. This is how we can search the registry to see who might fit for an exon 51 skipping trial or a nonsense mutation trial. So if we don't have your child's genetic mutation, then we wouldn't know that. So it's really critical to have that information in the registry. This is just a graph showing the average age at first steroid use for the Duchenne population in the registry. We found that the average age at starting steroids is 5 years old for Duchenne and 11 years old for Becker. And then this is showing steroid use and how that affects the age that you lose ambulation. And I think Stan was mentioning this before, that for boys who are never on steroids, the average age that they stop walking is 10. For those on prednisone, we found that it's 11, and those on deflazacort, it's 12. So these are just some of the things that we're able to see through the data in the registry, and we're still working on this 10-year registry report. We're actually working with analysts at RTI International, so we're hoping to have a more comprehensive report available, hopefully by the end of the year, to share with all of you. This is a busy slide, so I apologize, but I think it's a nice schematic that kind of shows how your data that you enter in the registry is used. If you look in the center in that funnel, you'll see you entering in, say, the genetic test report, or completing the medical surveys, or entering your demographics. So all of that information comprises your registry data. On the right-hand side, you'll see our registry team. So we do review and curate that data, and with that, we can notify you about specific research opportunities, or just provide support to you. Like if you call and have a question about clinical trials, or the genetic testing, or genetic counseling, we can help you with all of that. But then your data is also used by industry. We get a lot of frequent requests from industry for counts of, how many patients do you have who fit this criteria and are in this region of the country, and we can provide that feasibility data for trial planning. And then we also, on the left-hand side, we export some of the raw data set, again, de-identified, but we do share that with researchers actually around the world. So your data is definitely being used, and the more data we have and the more it's shared, then the more kind of new ideas can be generated and new trials can begin, and it's kind of a nice cycle. And even if you think, I don't ever want my child to be in a trial or a research study, that's fine. Just by entering your data in Duchenne Connect, you're really helping to advance research, and don't actually even ever have to leave your home. There's a new term that we're talking about a lot called citizen scientists, and this is really a great way to be a citizen scientist. By joining the registry and entering that data, you're really helping to advance research. And like I said, you don't even have to join a trial to do that. A couple other examples of how your data is being used. We are part of the Treat an MD International Neuromuscular Network, so there's certain key elements in your registry account, about 8 core data fields that are shared with the Global Duchenne Registry. And we also share all of our data with the Duchenne Regulatory Science Consortium, or DRISC. They're a part of Critical Path Institute, and they're actually pooling data from multiple different sources to develop a Duchenne disease progression model. So that's just a couple of examples of how your data is being used. There have been a couple recent publications. I think Stan mentioned the one on top just this month in Human Mutation. Stan and Richard Duong and their group at UCLA published a genotype-phenotype article, and I'm not going to say much more about it because I think Stan might be talking about it this afternoon. And then late last year, there was a publication in the Journal of Neuromuscular Diseases, and that came out from the Treat an MD group, where they had amassed over 5,000 patients with Duchenne from around the world, and were able to report on clinical outcomes in that group. And a large percentage of those patients were from Duchenne Connect, or the Duchenne Registry now. So if your data is in the registry, it's used in these reports and these manuscripts. So basically, the main statement I want to make is that your data truly does make a difference. It's so important. So if you're not registered, please register, and we can help you with that here at conference. If you are already registered, please make sure you update your information. I want to throw you in this picture because we are still giving away an iPad every month. So every month that you log in and complete a medical survey, you're entered into our monthly raffle for an iPad. So that's pretty exciting. You could be like one of these cuties and win an iPad. So I'm going to shift gears just a little bit because I do want to talk about our Decode Duchenne program, which is our free genetic testing program. We've had this program now since 2013. I want to thank our generous sponsors, both Sarepta Therapeutics and PTC Therapeutics support this program. Again, this provides free genetic testing to individuals with Duchenne and Becker, but now also to carrier females or women who are suspected of being a carrier. So this is huge. We were finally able to get that as part of the program just a couple months ago. So if there's any women out there who need carrier testing, please come see us. I also want to point out Jen Ely. She's, wave Jen. She is the genetic counselor I work with who runs the DECODE program. So we're both here and happy to talk with you about that. The criteria for testing, I'll just go through it briefly. I think I've already mentioned it's for now both boys or men with Duchenne and Becker or females who have a family history of Duchenne or Becker. And it can be for people who've never had testing or even for older patients who, this might not fit anyone in this room here, but people who need repeat testing done because the technology has changed so much over the years. And I imagine a lot of you here have already had the genetic testing, but if you haven't, come see us, or if you happen to be speaking with other families who need to get this genetic testing done, come see us because they can get it done completely free of charge. And currently, it's only for individuals living in the US and Canada. And I do have that one of the criteria for testing is a financial barrier, but we're really quite lenient about that. Anybody is accepted, even if the barrier is just that your copay or deductible is too high, that's fine. And I'll admit we don't even need documentation of a financial barrier. If you just tell us that, that's good enough. So, and the testing is all done through Perkin-Elmer Genetics now. And I do want to mention this. The application process does have to be initiated by your child's doctor, or if you're a woman, by your general practitioner or OBGYN. But it's a very simple, fast process. You just go online to our website. There's an online application. It's very short. That comes directly to Jen, and she reviews them usually within 24 hours and can get the paperwork back to your doctor and even order a lab kit if it's needed. So we're trying to make the process as quick and easy as possible. And I think this was mentioned at some other point, but I did want to point out again that we've now received over 1,000 applications to the DECODE Duchenne program. So that just happened this month. So that was a really significant milestone for us, and we're very excited to be able to offer this service. And I think it's really a great example of a beneficial partnership between an advocacy organization and industry working together to really benefit the community. So thank you for listening to me. And again, Jen and I are both going to be at the registry/DECODE table. I think it's being set up at 3 o'clock. It should be somewhere near the registration area. So please come see us. We're happy to talk to you about DECODE or about the registry. We can even help you register or update your child's account. And that's our email and phone number if you need it as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. We're coming up to our first break, but I wondered if anyone has a question for any of the team members that have spoken this morning. You're allowed to ask anything. And if you do have a question, if you'll come to the mic so that everyone can hear you, and in addition, we're streaming so others can hear the question. Question. Can you come to the mic? Would you mind?
Is it possible to get a copy of the presentation?
So all of these presentations will be up on our website. I won't give you a time because then Kimberly in the back would yell at me. But what we do is all of the presentations from the conference will be listed. We usually go back to the individuals who've provided those to us and make sure that everything, because sometimes unpublished data is available on the slides, and so they want to remove that. But all of these slides will be available on the website within a short window of time following.
Thank you.
Sure. Other questions?
I think this is for Dr. Nelson. I have a son that has deletion, two sons of 6 through 17, and his first CK levels were 31,000, and they just dropped to 16,000. Is that normal to have such a fluctuation?
It is. This is not to
Looks like it's
You're up.
It's on. Okay. Yeah, it is unfortunately normal. So there's big fluctuations in the CK value, and a twofold change like that can be due to, the CK is leaking from the muscles all the time, and the volume of muscles that boys have. Unfortunately, as boys age and lose muscle mass, actually the CK comes down. It's not a sign of the disease necessarily getting better. And just within, if all of us went out and ran intensively in the hot sun or not, we'd all probably bump up our CK a little bit as well. And our boys are just more labile than that because they have membranes that are actually quite labile, easy to damage. So a twofold difference I wouldn't necessarily take as an indication of anything good or bad on the opposite side. That being said, it's not unreasonable to use a CK level within the context of a clinical trial. It wouldn't be your sole outcome measure. But if you indeed had a therapy that was protecting the membrane or protecting the muscles and improving, if the CK came down while function was improving, that'd be a good sign. So, sure.
Other questions?
Really nice and informative presentations. I have a question for Dr. Nelson. I believe you talked about the genetics. So, like we often hear that some mutations tend to be leaky, and I was wondering if you can comment on that, and if certain type of mutations can be leakier than other types.
Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit about this more this afternoon. So there are some mutations which should lead to a completely out of frame, completely non-functional dystrophin protein. It's been well recognized. Actually, the boy that I showed you a little slide of with the cluster of things that look like grapes is leaky. So he does indeed make some dystrophin, even though he really shouldn't. We call those, and they've been recognized for years, revertant fibers. So they've, in a sense, there's molecular mechanisms where you could make an in-frame protein, even though you have an out-of-frame mutation. So an example of that is an exon 30 one-base deletion. That exon 30 is now out of frame, so it should lead to no protein whatsoever. However, there's not, every exon is encoded to be an exon because of the sequence within the exon. So deleting it one base has made it look just a little bit less like an exon. It's mutated, and therefore that exon could be missed or could be skipped over by natural skipping mechanisms. So every exon is chosen to be included or excluded by the splicing machinery every single time the DMD transcript is made. And that can be done in error or just skipped, and can result in a mechanism where kids' bodies could make some actually functional dystrophin. There's different mutations will have different ability to be leaky, which means that they could indeed make some protein. Probably the most common one are more deep intronic mutations, which I didn't talk too much about, but often they would be out of frame if included into the mature message, but sometimes the normal splicing occurs. So you actually have a mixture of different RNA species, and therefore a mixture of different proteins that occur in those kids. So there's a variety of different mechanisms. I would say we've recognized revertant fibers for a couple of decades, and we do not have it fully worked out for why this mechanism occurs in any one child at all. It's actually an area of super interesting exploration.
Other questions? Do you want to come to the mic, if you don't mind?
My question is for Dr. Nelson. I mean, we look at a lot of DMD patients have cognitive disorders. So, I mean, whatever literature reading I had done was you find you have 5 forms of dystrophin in the brain, and out of that, 2 are missing in all the patients, whereas the 3 which are DP170 or DP116 and DP140, which are originated in a particular introns. So depending upon the mutation, some may be missing in the brain and some may not be missing in the brain. So my query is that if the restoration of dystrophin is done in the skeletal muscles by the therapies like exon skipping or other things, does it imply that these corrections would also lead to the improvement in the cognitive disorders that our children face?
Yeah, I would say not necessarily. I think we're very focused on skeletal muscle, and even some of the exciting results are focused on skeletal muscle improvements, less so even heart improvements, much less cognitive improvements, which will be a difficult challenge since the brain sort of developed without without dystrophin there. The brain is nowhere near as plastic as skeletal muscle is. Actually, the heart is nowhere near as plastic as skeletal muscle is. So just targeting skeletal muscle is possible to do, and targeting brain and fixing that will be more difficult. So I think the cognitive issues will be challenging. Yeah, there is interesting data, an interesting way to look at some of the data in terms of different mutation types might break the skeletal muscle isoform, it's a huge protein, so that form might be missing, but some of the other brain isoforms ought to still be being made because the promoter sequence and the start of the protein are still there. Yet, that correlation is not super strong in terms of, the location of those mutations, but there is some data suggesting that different types of mutations have different risks for cognitive issues. So I think there's still a lot to learn in that area.
So what should be the standard of care for such children who have the cognitive disorders? Is it the same as the autism standards which are set, or do they have any different standards of care?
Yeah, I probably have a pretty active discussion on that one issue. So DMD mutations are one of the more common genetic causes of autism and autism spectrum disorders. It's actually a shockingly obvious fact. 1 in 5,000 boys are born with a DMD mutation. And, the autism rate is artificially been increased over the course of my lifetime by a lot. It's completely due to sort of shifting boys from an intellectual disability category to an autism category. But if you just take the autism part, a large fraction of the boys that have autism also will have a DMD mutation. I mean, it's a tiny fraction, but it's relatively common for the mutational status. They ought to be treated like other kids with autism and also have all those services. What often happens in my observation is that we so dominate the discussion about the really aggressive skeletal muscle disease that's going to be the major problem in their lives, that the autism and the other cognitive issues are relatively dismissed. They're not even recognized as being important because you have this other more serious thing. And my advice in general would be not to do that and to indeed treat it as its own independent, it's related to the DMD mutation, but its own independent set of resources that are needed and successfully applied in many instances.
Kathi, do you want to comment?
Yeah.
So that was the discussion also with the care guidelines. So there's a psychosocial section in the care guidelines looking at the incidence of autism and the surveillance and management of autism, as well as other neurocognitive issues and mental health issues. So the recommendations largely are treat the disorder, whatever the disorder is, whatever the cause of the disorder is. So if you have autism, you treat it as autism, you manage it as autism in spite of the Duchenne, so not because of the Duchenne. I hope that makes sense. And I think Denise is going to talk a little bit more about resources, and there are more discussions after the break that will allude to management of those disorders as well.
In the next session, we're going to take on school and talk about some of the cognitive issues and impairments and how to manage, because sometimes we hear from families who say the behaviors are indeed worse than the skeletal muscle impairment. So how you deal with school, how you discipline these kids, how you manage their behaviors at home as well as in school, so that family life is not negatively impacted in terms of its quality. Next question.
Thank you. Dr. Nelson, again, just a reflection back. You talked about muscle biopsies, needle biopsies. Which muscles would be most amenable to the biopsies? And is this becoming more common as far as following the progression of the dystrophy and/or dystrophin that's present, especially with exon skipping medication? So
the answer is it is not becoming more common yet. Do I do something to make this done?
I think
All right. It's not being used routinely in clinical practice. I think we under-biopsy kids. The typical muscles that would be biopsied would be the gastroc, the TA, the vastus lateralis in the legs. Many of the clinical trials are biopsying the biceps, and pretty much any skeletal muscle could work. But the heterogeneity of information, the heterogeneity of how muscles might respond to, for instance, exon skipping, actually causes problems as the data are analyzed. All of us would prefer to see the exact same muscle group, the same location, make it as clean as possible so you could comment robustly that indeed dystrophin was induced if you have a dystrophin induction strategy. I think it's inevitable that we'll move to a strategy where we will want and need to actually repeatedly muscle biopsy our kids because of dystrophin restoration. That's not necessarily going to be a popular mindset or necessarily terribly welcome, but I would rather have a disease process where we're restoring dystrophin and repeatedly muscle biopsying, like we do, leukemia. When kids are diagnosed with leukemia, we repeatedly do bone marrow aspirates and biopsies to observe the actual location of the disease, and it has fundamentally changed the disease process. It's allowed chemotherapy to be reduced in many instances or increased based on how the patient is responding. I think that's where we're going to head here. It's part of the impetus, in my eyes, to actually make muscle biopsies much easier than what are done clinically. So I think it'll head towards a needle biopsy, which is actually pretty tolerable. I've done needle biopsies on kids as young as 6 years old with just distraction and just with local numbing and anesthesia. That's quite possible to do and get very good histology samples from those. So many muscles could be done. The challenge is going to be as kids get younger and younger, muscles get smaller and smaller, and safely sampling them gets more challenging.
And just one quick follow-up, and just be brief. Along with what the other presenter had requested as far as autism, is there any evidence that treatment of your muscular dystrophy with the steroids also changed some of the autistic spectrums that you're seeing?
Yeah, I'll give you my opinion. I think there'll be a lot of these. So often, and this is a pretty common clinical observation, is the kids that have, autism, rigid thoughts, behaviors, enter in with the diagnosis having more behavioral issues. Oftentimes, those are the kids that are more difficult to put on steroids. So there's clearly an influence of steroids. If you were on steroids, it would affect your mood. It would make you more labile. It would make you a little bit more on edge. And the same happens for the kids. They just don't have the ability to necessarily sort of recognize it when they're 4, 5, 6 years old. So oftentimes we actually have to stop steroids because of the exacerbation of behavioral disorders, and it really is unlivable for the families. So there's clearly an interplay. I've yet to ever see it make anything better, though, from the cognitive issues. I don't know if anybody.
No, I don't think
that's.
Thank you.
Yeah, anecdotally, we haven't improved the cognitive issues, and I think this is why some institutions are trying different regimens like high-dose weekend, so that the boys have a very high dose on weekend or on 2 days of the week, and then much less impact in terms of their behaviors and their psychosocial behaviors in school and so on. So people have tried different regimens. I know in Europe they use 10 days on and 10 days off. In this country, in the US, we typically see the high-dose weekend steroids or the daily steroids, and all of them certainly push those buttons that little boys have and children have a little easier. And so part of it is trying to really adjust to those behaviors. And hopefully in the next session, Denise and others are going to talk about maybe how to better manage them as well. So right now we're going to talk about issues related to school and behaviors, sometimes that are related to Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and how to manage those behaviors so that home is reasonable and a healthy and good environment, and the school environment is the same. And what we want to do is make sure that your son has a good school experience. He's in an area where he can learn really well, and he enjoys the learning experience. So our first speaker is not going to be Catherine Butz. It's going to be Dr. Buder. Dr. Buder is from Nationwide Children's Hospital, a clinical psychologist, and involved in the care of the psychology of children with chronic disease. So, Dr. Buder?
Well, hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I don't feel like I'm the expert in the room. This is the first time that I've been to this conference, and really met Pat a couple months ago, and she invited me to start thinking about Duchenne, and I hadn't really confronted it before. I'm the chief of psychology at Nationwide Children's Hospital. We have a very elaborated system of behavioral health services that are well integrated with our medical subspecialties. Earlier, you heard that neuropsychology might be an important component of your child's treatment team, and I think that's probably true, and I want to underscore the importance of neuropsychological assessment and understanding the different kind of cognitive profiles that might be present in in this population, and particularly for your child, and the different kind of learning profiles that might exist. But psychology and behavioral health services are far more elaborated than that in most hospital settings. We also have a group of psychologists that are often referred to as pediatric psychologists who help children and families cope and adjust and adapt and thrive in the context of their medical illness. We also have psychologists that are often referred to simply as child clinical psychologists who are helping children with more traditionally mental health or psychiatric diagnoses like anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, ADHD. And then at Nationwide Children's Hospital, we also have a group of neurodevelopmental psychologists who focus on the developmental aspects of chronic health conditions as well as neurodevelopmental disorders themselves. That's actually my area of expertise. I grew up as a pediatric psychologist and further specialized in neurodevelopmental disabilities. I am a member of the Autism Treatment Network. I'm a principal investigator in that network. I do genetic research, but in autism, not in Duchenne. And I was particularly inspired by some of the questions that were coming up about autism spectrum disorder at the end of the first part of this morning. That isn't what I prepared to talk on, though. But I'd be happy, I just want to put it out there that if you had questions about autism and autism treatment, if they don't come up in the context of this conversation, grab me over the weekend and I'd be happy to talk with any of you. What I was asked to prepare today was two conversations, and the first one is how to talk to family, friends, and school. And so I was reflecting on, in the context of all chronic health conditions in pediatrics, how do we do this? Why I had to think about all chronic health conditions in pediatrics is because we haven't really done this research as a field in pediatric psychology or neuropsychology to understand how it is specifically done for kids with Duchenne. The research is too scarce for me to tell you specifically in this disease population what specific things come up, how is it unique, what is the precision psychological medicine we should be using in your kids' cases. So with that being said, let me tell you what I thought about. By the way, Dr. Catherine Butz is our clinical director at Nationwide Children's Hospital. She is responsible for supporting our neuromuscular programs and supporting the psychologists that work there. She wanted to come, but she had a family obligation that came up and couldn't do that. The first thing I thought is the title of the talk is Talking to Friends and Family in School. And so I thought, well, gee, can you talk too much about this? Probably not. I think disclosing and discussing the diagnosis with family members is critical. If you feel like you're talking too much, you probably aren't. I think doing this as soon as you can, as soon as you're ready, and doing it as often as possible is going to be helpful to children and to families. And probably in most contexts, talking about and disclosing your thoughts and your feelings and your knowledge about the diagnosis makes good sense. In terms of thinking about family beyond you and your partner, and maybe even your other children and other friends of the family, what kinds of things should you think about that are going to come up in these conversations? I think often when you're delivering news that is a defining moment in your life and your child's life, it's probably going to be a defining moment in the lives of other people who care about you. They're going to have some of the same reactions and questions that you've had. There's going to be anger, there's going to be fear, there might be denial, there might even be relief, especially if you've been on a diagnostic journey. If you have thought something is wrong with your son, but you didn't know what it was, and now you have an answer, an odd sense of relief. I think the other thing that comes up when you're delivering diagnostic impressions to other family members or to friends of the family, a lot of times they're going to ask a lot of questions. They're going to want a lot of knowledge. When people feel like they don't know how to cope with the emotion, they're going to be asking for information. And so how do you deal with people who are asking for information when maybe you don't want to repeat it, you don't want to talk about it, you don't have it? It might be helpful to have resources to send them to. Check out this website. Go to the Parent Project website. Be prepared to give them information because they might be asking for some and you may not be in the space where you want to be their library. In the context of those conversations, you're probably going to have your own feelings that you have to manage. Guilt, grief, maybe anger. I'll say more about anger in a minute. I think it's okay to label those feelings. As a psychologist, I'll say, just let people know who you are at that moment in time. I'm feeling too much grief to talk about that. It's too sad. It's okay to be transparent and explicit about how you're feeling. I think the other thing to keep in mind, and I'll say this in a little different way in a second, but when we have sick kids, we want to protect them, and we could be overprotective of them. But when we have sick kids who have a chronic condition and they're going to be living their lives with this condition, we also need to do what we can to make sure they develop as complexly and as optimally as possible. And we can be overprotective, and so can grandparents and aunts and uncles and people who are very well-meaning. So I think it's important to have that conversation that we're trying to avoid being overprotective. The other thing we talk about in pediatric psychology in the context of making diagnoses and helping parents anticipate what's coming through living with a chronic condition is how do we support siblings? Siblings often feel responsible for protecting, defending their affected sibling. They also might be the subject of teasing themselves. We call this stigmatization by association. It's okay to talk or give space for other children in your family to talk about what it's like to be in school with their brother. And maybe it's positive, but maybe there are some downsides. Give them room to talk about that. They may have difficulty expressing their own needs. I don't want to be a bother. I don't want to distract you. I don't want to take away from what you need to do for my brother. Let them know that what they need and their relationship with you and their space in the family is important as well. There should be equality among siblings, and finding time and space and words to share that and emphasize that is important. When you start thinking about the extended family and even friends of the family and helping them cope with you, I think it's important to also involve your child in those discussions. Everyone has to become an expert. You, your spouse, your son who's affected, but also all the other friends and family that are part of your support system. Earlier you heard that you're the center of your child's treatment team. You're the treatment coordinator. And part of that is helping everyone become more expert and enlisting your son when at a developmentally appropriate level to also be teaching other people to learn more about this disease. I think you can seek support from your care team, from outside agencies, and really any relevant resource. As I said earlier, be careful with what you find on the internet, but there's also a lot of good information out there that you can direct people to become more expert. I think it's important to teach people who care about you responses to disease-related questions. So maybe you're not the only person sharing information about your family. You're not the only person sharing information about your son's disease. You can model and demonstrate healthy attitudes and behaviors, and you can try to teach people the words they should use. People might not be able to talk to you because they don't know what words to use. They don't know what's the right way to talk about different stages of ambulation in non-clinical ways that aren't offensive or hurtful. Showing them how to use those words will benefit you in the long run because you'll have a conversation partner and a source of support that you could turn to. Sometimes people back away from us if they just don't know how to talk to us. And so this is the one thing I would say you demand of your healthcare professionals. Help them teach you the vocabulary. Help ask them to frame how to talk about this disease with other people in non-clinical ways. What about school? We're going to hear a lot more about school in a minute from our next presenter, but I wanted to highlight just some interactions between school, advocacy, and the disease process. And again, in Duchenne, but also really this is the same across many different pediatric chronic conditions. One thing that you have to think about is school is where kids spend the greatest majority of their time. It's their social environment. And when you think about any disease, how does it impact a child's adjustment and social inclusion? Children are naturally, particularly middle childhood, beginning to get increasingly more self-conscious about their appearance. And when you look different because of treatment, let's say steroid treatment, you're bigger than the rest of your family, you're bigger than many of your friends, you look like a child who's taking steroids, that might open you up to stigmatization. We like to think that kids can understand, kids would have empathy, but kids are kids, and they might bully or tease. a child with Duchenne. Teasing already and bullying occurs at very high rates. 28% of children in grade school experience bullying. I think that number might actually even be higher, but that's the most reliable statistic I can share with you. And so it's not, I don't think, probably uncommon for us to think about, or shouldn't be uncommon for us to think about this impacting your kids as well. Signs that a kid is potentially being bullied at school. Maybe they are afraid to go to school. There's school refusal. They have somatic complaints. They have bad dreams. They have trouble sleeping. The other thing to think about, and you heard a little bit about this from the PT presentation this morning, children might have natural and increasingly more activity limitations that can impact how they're included at school. I really liked what our physical therapist said this morning in terms of if there's a will, there's a way. I think it's really important to find ways of working through those limitations and finding ways for your child to be as included as possible. Also recognize that your child might have emotional reactions and adjustment issues related to their body image, beyond just the activity limitations that they might have. And they might end up with a certain amount of anxiety and avoidance. Anxiety is a cruel mental health condition, because the reward for being anxious, or at least the reward for treating anxiety, our self-treatment, is to back away from and avoid the things that make us anxious. And then our anxiety goes down. So we're rewarded, we feel less anxious because we avoided the thing that was making us anxious. And it just increasingly shrinks our world. And so we have to be careful about how we approach that. And then I think the other thing that you have to think about to really promote successful inclusion in school is helping your child appreciate pain, and pain treatment, and noticing and monitoring pain. Getting sent home from school because you start to feel tense in a certain muscle, when maybe a stretch could help you get through the school day, or a pain management technique might help you get through the school day, is going to be far better than getting sent home. In terms of thinking about how our patients are coping, I think it's really important in an interdisciplinary assessment setting and something like a registry program like you have here in the Duchenne Registry, for us to be thinking about how do we screen for emotional and behavioral functioning so that we can intervene in these problems as quickly and as soon as they start to emerge. I think we should also be assessing and promoting peer relations. I'll say just a bit more about friends in a second. As I've been mentioning, stress and pain management, I think, will be an important component to keeping kids successfully included in school. And as we sort of said about with reference to the physical therapy presentation, doing as much as you can to get kids involved in as much of their preferred activities as possible is going to be really important, including any extracurricular activities, athletics, sports, to the extent that it can be modified for a child at any one point in time. Self-image is a significant component of being successfully included in community settings, including school. All of us grow up learning about ourselves from the way other people perceive us. It's unfortunate, it's just a part of being social animals. But we do take our cues from how other people see us. And so I think there's significant work that can be done in parenting, and maybe in specialized parenting if you have a child who's experiencing depression and social withdrawal through therapy, to help kids improve their self-view. Develop an identity of an I can rather than an I can't. Emphasize how they are more the same or similar to other kids than just how they're different. And enhance skills for dealing with social stigmatization when it happens. At school itself, how do you interact with school professionals and school administrators? I think the thing that you probably want to put yourself in a position to be doing from day one is being an information seeker from schools. The more information you get from them and the more information they get from you, ask them to be information seeking from you, you'll be able to promote more predictability and more control. You'll want to make sure that you put some kind of program in place to monitor your child's school and social functioning at school. A daily report card that gives you feedback about how well your child's performing in different classes or how well your child's doing in social settings. If it can't be daily, maybe it can be weekly. It's probably got to be more than the once a year student-teacher or student-parent, teacher-parent conference. I think it's better to be proactive than reactive. Talk to school prior to when there's a problem. Identify your advocates at school. Bake them cookies. Bring them brownies. If they like tequila, bring them a bottle of tequila. Find out what your kid's teacher's like, or the teacher who you think is the most accessible, the most kind-hearted, the sweetest, and make her or him your friend. If you don't know anything about special education services, know that your child, if their medical condition is impacting their school or social inclusion experience at school, has educational rights. And those educational rights can be protected through an individualized education plan, an IEP, or a plan that's also called a 504 plan, which refers to a section of the educational law, Section 504. A lot more can be said about that. A lot more needs to be learned about that. But if you feel like your child's school program is not addressing his educational needs, in part because of how his medical condition is affecting his school and educational management, you have rights. Your child has rights. And you might have to seek outside advocacy, like a neuropsychologist at your children's hospital, to help you manage that. I have an opportunity later in this weekend to talk more about the cognitive concerns that are present for kids with Duchenne. There is some evidence that there are distinctive cognitive profiles that will complicate learning across the curriculum, even mild deficits that we should be paying attention to, particularly things that we call executive function deficits that sit organized in the neuronal systems of the prefrontal cortex, that part of your brain right behind your forehead. The executive functions that we see impaired, that we have seen in multiple reports that have come out in our literature for kids with DMD, difficulty in shifting task, moving from one activity to the next, one cognitive task to the next task, multitasking. None of us can really multitask well, but some of us can fake it. It's harder for our boys to do that. It's hard to switch task. It's hard to inhibit responses, almost like there's no filter in some kids. They just say what's on their mind, which can be refreshing and sometimes is cute in a 6-year-old, but might get you in trouble when you're 16, right? There's also difficulties with planning, directing, and intending behavior. Most of our behaviors are intentional. Right now, you're intending to pay attention to me, hoping I say something wise, smart, or funny, right? That's why you're focusing your attention. That takes effort, and you're good at it, but your sons may struggle with it. And then there's this area of verbal working memory deficits that we have identified as well. Working memory is your ability to have two pieces of information in your head at the same time and then use it to solve a problem, particularly in the area of using language information and holding that language information in short-term memory and being able to produce a solution to a problem that requires that information is going to be more challenging for our kids. This might mean we might have problems in math, or this might mean that we have some struggle with reading comprehension. Just a few more things I want to say here. The psychosocial concerns for patients with Duchenne are also going to be things that you have to pay attention to. Anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, ADHD can all be mental health diagnoses that are more common in our kids than in just the general population. These things also can impact their school adjustment and might have to be a part of an educational plan like an IEP. In terms of anxiety and depression, we have ways of treating anxiety and depression pretty effectively. Cognitive behavior therapy is something that schools won't offer, but if you can improve a way a child is approaching their negative thoughts and feelings, it might improve their adjustment at school, and therefore will help them maybe perhaps perform better at school. Also, stress management and relaxation training can be a component of therapeutic interventions to address anxiety and depression. One other thing that might impact school is the burden of treatment, and particularly maybe even the burden of clinical trial participation. Time, cost, stress, even the emotional whiplash of being involved in clinical trials. All those things can wreak havoc on a child's emotional stability and their cognitive ability to really be present at school. Absenteeism comes with that. And if you're not at school, you just you're at risk for increased social isolation. And that, I think, is something, if you're aware of, you might be able to plan for. And very quickly, I'll just say something about friendships for kids. It's an important factor in their social and cognitive development. The more friends, the more opportunity your children have to develop meaningful friendships, the less likely their world will shrink over time. It helps diversify support for your child and also for you, and improves the quality of their life. When to disclose to friends? Well, I think your child should. In most chronic health conditions, we suggest that children should be in charge of that disclosure at a developmentally appropriate level, at a developmentally appropriate time. Remember, though, that all friendships have different levels of intimacy, and your son may be interested in disclosing to one friend and not to another. You can help him figure out who the right person is to trust. When do you do it? Probably as soon as possible in the friendship, but also at the right time. All these things don't have yes or no answers. I'll say just something very quickly about developmental patterns in friendship. Kids are selective in their friends, generally speaking. They're not friends with a whole bunch of people. So it's important to figure out, especially as your child moves through the grade school years, 7 to 9, 9 to 12, they move toward increasing levels of trust and intimacy with friends over time. I think you could expect that your child's friendships might be naturally more immature than otherwise would have developed if they weren't a child with a pediatric chronic health condition. So if you anticipate that, you might be able to avoid that outcome, right? Helping them find ways toward more intimate friendships through the grade school years, I think, will be really important for their longer-term adjustment through adolescence. One thing to recognize that kids through the grade school years become increasingly more connected to peer groups. In early middle childhood, those groups are relatively informal, but by the time you reach about age 10 to 12, our psychological research tells us that groups get more formal and more gender segregated. Peers often conform to the expectations of their peer group. And so, again, thinking about how you help your son have as typical experience as possible. I'm just trying to give you some typical developmental milestones. Don't underestimate the value of being popular. Sometimes getting your child the newest, greatest game is okay if it helps other kids like them a little bit more. It is okay for you to want to try to promote the popularity of your son. At the same time, it's also okay to teach your son, and you should teach your son, not to let people take advantage of them. And this is where I'll probably end my comments here. Some children with very visible differences, whether they're using a wheelchair or they look like a child who maybe is taking a certain kind of medication, they begin to have anxiety in social situations. And so what happens? Like I said, it's a vicious cycle. They're afraid others will notice their difference and treat them poorly. They begin to want to avoid those situations. They learn they don't have to interact with other children or handle questions about their appearance or difference. That's rewarding for the avoidance. And then it really just leads to more anxiety and more avoidance over time. And so the intervention, what you do to try to prevent this is you build skills. I've seen some really nice things already here as I've interacted with some of the boys. I've seen kids give me really good eye contact. They've maintained really strong posture, probably as best they can. And then I've seen other boys who averted eye gaze at me when I was walking down the hall and I smiled at them. Teaching our sons to look up at people if they can, to smile at people when they pass, to have that level of assertive, nonverbal social communication is a really, really good first step in social skill training. More complicated social skills, teaching them how to respond to questions about their disease, try to encourage them to promote a curious posture among their friend group rather than any cruelty. One way to do that is to help your kids have scripted one-liners. Let them be the expert. Also teach them how to offer information, reassure their friend, I'm going to be okay. I could still play video games. I'll find a way to play kickball with you. I might have to throw the ball, or I might have to run bases in my wheelchair, but I could still play with you. And have them talk about something else, deflect. So give information, reassure, deflect is a really important social skill that we tend to teach kids that can really help them survive the social milieu at school. And my final point here is how do they initiate conversations? It's okay to practice this. Role play at home. Role play many times. It's also helpful to teach them to ask open-ended questions. What's on your mind? Rather than asking a closed-ended question like, how's it going? Right? And then also teaching kids to have reflective listening skills, how to be empathic over time.
All right. Thank you. Now we're going to talk about school. What happens? What can you do? What should you do? These IEPs seem a little bit overwhelming, and how to make friends at school, and how to really impact your son's healthy, productive school environment. So I'm happy to present to you Denise Gruender, who's from North Carolina. I typically say South Carolina and get it wrong, but she's from North Carolina, does the testing, and has a school for autistic children. So welcome, Denise.
Thank you, Pat. I helped raise two wonderful boys with Pat, and often days she would call and say, "Niece, I just have to run to Cincinnati." Why, Pat? I need a new dress. I need an outfit. Okay, no problem. I'll just be an hour. 6 hours later, she'd be back, and it was all great, and she had 2 or 3 new dresses and a new set of dishes. But that's great because she became the perfect mom at home because she had a lot more patience, because she took time for herself. And that's one of the things that I want to talk to you about today. Because if you take time for yourself and let the school help with raising those children, life is much more convenient. So I brought you all kinds of little tools I'm going to show you, so you don't get to look at any screens. You have to think outside the box. Today, everything I say is just a start, because one-on-one, we can figure out your home and how we can make school better for you. I will be here all weekend, and as I said last night, I have no family, I don't have to cook dinner, I am on cloud 9. So I will sit with you for as long as you would like and fix that house to where it can be productive for all of you. Now, some of the things as I go through, some of the things you're seeing every day in your own home life, take some notes and then go sign up at the registration desk. I made a little cheat sheet of half-hour slots that we can sit down and talk about your own personal situations. So think what you need. Every state's different. So I can't tell you exactly what your school will provide for you, but you got to be the advocate and you have to fight for it. And I don't have all the answers, but we can brainstorm and get that going. Every one of you are at various ages. You're at various needs for your children. Academics are huge, behavioral is even bigger, and sensory issues are one of our top concerns. All right? So early intervention, here's where we start. The things I heard last night, behavior, it's huge at home. We don't know how to handle his behavior. We're having learning struggles. We don't think he's getting it in the classroom. There's frustration. He's angry because he can't do it. Yes, he can. In many, many ways he can. And then he shuts down. And what do I do with that? So all of those issues are language development, sensory, and motor development. And it usually falls in one of those categories. So we can break each one of those down. Language development is processing. So how information goes in, turns around, and comes back out is called auditory processing. Visual processing is how they see that information, take it in, and spit it back out. So those are the two biggest problems we're going to see in some kids that fall on the spectrum of autism. With how they process, then comes all the way they come out and they can't make a sentence, and then they're frustrated, you're frustrated, and the teachers are frustrated. Okay? Now add Duchenne, clinical trials, steroids, and everything else you're dealing with, and you have a hefty little mess. And that little mess of yours is ready to have fun. Make school fun. Make everything you do with academics fun. You come home, and he has a big smiley face that's been crossed out in a frown face. Gotta love that teacher, don't you? So, now, kill him with kindness. You go into that teacher, and you make up to her. This is the best that happened this week. Well, it's probably last week, I guess. Last Monday. A lady came in, and she had a bag of groceries for one of our teachers. She said it was a buy one, get one free today, and I gave you all the free things. That child is making progress at our school because that mom just kissed up and killed with kindness and a bag of groceries. Anything you can do, because that teacher is going to just take that little one under her wings and do everything she can for him. So think outside the box of how you can teach that teacher how to be all yours. All right, behavior. Behavior starts at home, and then I send them home because they're in trouble at school. They bit, they hit because they could not get their words out, or they didn't listen, or they just shut down, and they sat down and said, no, I'm not doing it. And when they shut down and say, no, I'm not doing it, the teacher has no recourse. And then they cry, and then everybody's crying, and they send them home. And what do? Oh, hi, sweetheart. I'm so sorry you got in trouble today. Let's go ride our bike and let's get some ice cream because you'll feel better and so will mommy. You are going to become instantly the wicked witch of the West. And if I send a child home and you become wicked and you say, mommy loves you, but mommy gets her time at 3 o'clock when you come home from school, then life is perfect. And then at 3 o'clock, turn on the nice mommy charm. But if we get sent home from school, that's when you have to support us at school of what we saw. So, child comes home, it's wicked time, and maybe they scrub the floor. They don't get their bike. They don't have dessert that night. Everything is a negative, and mommy is sad. Daddy's sad. And we need to call daddy at work and tell him what happened. And then all of a sudden, the next day, we have a perfect day at school. They don't want to get sent home. So that's one of the first approaches we use. And I would say 80 to 90% of the time, it works. So just think through of how we can be not so nice at home, because you want it to be a comfort, and this little guy's been diagnosed with Duchenne. You want to be kind. They have a whole life of behaving that's going to make for a wonderful, wonderful life if we can have behavior management. Now, we come home, and the teacher has said, we didn't do so well on this activity. It was adding 2-digit numbers, or it was adding 1 plus 1. We didn't get it. All right. Think of a bell curve. When you have a standard bell curve, average IQ is right smack dab in the 100 at the 100 mark. If your child is average IQ, go ahead and ask yourself, if I'm average IQ, how many repetitions do I need to get something? What we're finding is around 26 to 27 repetitions before you get it, is some informal studies. So if you hear something, how long did it take you to learn your multiplication tables? That's going to tell you, if you learned them quickly, you're at a 120, 130 IQ. If you took 26 to 27 times of hearing each one of those, you're at a very average IQ. If you took longer like I did, you're a little lower. So that's okay too, because you will get it. It just takes you a little bit longer. So think of who that child is. You don't know who he is yet. He's 5, 6, 7. We don't know that yet. But watch when you teach something. If they just need extra repetition, go for it. Do it at home. But now, how are you supposed to be the wicked witch and the mommy teacher and the mommy love bug? You can't do it all. There are volunteers everywhere. And people ask you, what can I do for you? Take advantage of them. Let them come into your home for an hour once a week and work with your child on whatever the teacher sent home that we didn't get. And we don't do that because we don't want to ask for help. And you got to ask for help. Because going to Cincinnati gave her the ability to then sit down and have a lot more patience. So either go to Cincinnati and shop a little, or go out, but don't be the teacher and the love bug and the educator. You can't do everything. So take advantage of your neighbors. Now, I'm going to show you just a few things that we use every day in our school because it makes a difference for you at home, and we send these home. A pillowcase. It's not what you think. Take your sewing machine, again, a volunteer, somebody that volunteers, ask them to make one for you. You can buy them online. You sew 3 strips, and this becomes a weighted blanket once you fill it. Children on the autism spectrum, and even yourself, might do wonders with a weighted blanket. We sit down and we put it on our lap. It's not so much what's happening when the weighted blanket is on you, it's what happens later. It calms you. And if any of you could call my husband and tell him that's why I need 4 quilts to sleep with, because I need weight at night. I go 90 to nothing all day long, and then you lay down, and what are you still doing? I know what you're doing. And that's how your mind's going. You put weight on you, and you're instantly more calm. So here's the problem. Every child of every size has a different weighted blanket. And when you fill these columns with rice, beans, whatever it is, and you weight that child, they're going to have that calming sense and just relax a little. You can also squeeze and stroke after school, just while you're hearing about our day. Everything you do, just squeezing. There's all kinds of techniques that your OT and your PT can show you, but you watch what that does. And just do it on yourself and see how it is. Ask your husband. You know what you feel like when somebody just rubs your shoulders. It's the same thing with stretching those joints. So weighted blanket, stretching, all of those when you're doing your afternoon help. But now let's go back to school. Send this to school with you. Our school is full of them. We have probably 15 of these, and we use them all day long. Also, when we are changing classes, we carry jugs of sand. So we're walking to the next class with jugs of sand, and you're looking at me and you're saying, that's child abuse. They're very heavy. But what happens is it stretches them out, it calms their body. Try it at home. Anything that's going to make the least little bit of difference in that easing measure is going to be wonderful. You can buy these online, but you're going to constantly be changing them as your child ages and the weight. You can just rip your little seam, add more, take out, but you might be surprised what this will do for you. Next, visual timer. My child can't sit at dinner. Oh, yes, he can. No, he gets really, really antsy. Yep, that's okay. Sit. The end. There are no arguments. Well, you still come back to me, but he wouldn't. So now we ask you to come into our school and watch. He sits at lunch, watch, and the parents are flabbergasted. Along with lunchtime comes eating disorders. They don't want the sensory. They don't want us to chew on hard things or soft things or mushy things. So having just one session with a speech and language pathologist who has background in eating and feeding therapy will help you get out of your little rut of just chicken nuggets and watermelon. That was a lot of our diets, chicken nuggets and watermelon. We make you every day send a new item in your lunchbox so that you're always trying new foods. You got to kick that by 5, 6, or 7. Or you're going to be locked in for a while. So get somebody to help you with that eating and feeding and sit at the table. If you get a little visual timer, you can buy these online. And again, it's called, it's Time Timer. So if you want to order one of these, all you're going to do is set it, and that child gets a visual of sitting at the kitchen table. So guess what? As it finally gets to the end, you can get up and go. If you're still in the middle of a conversation, that doesn't matter. The timer's up. You let him go. So that's all that he had to do is sit there. Same thing within the morning. He cannot come out of his bed until that visual timer has reached. So get ready to do a little bit more with visual for your children because they like structure and they like a start time and an end time. With a start time and an end time, this is what we use every day. Now, I know you can't see this very well. It's a little stick with a lot of Velcro on it. You use this at home, and you use this at school. It starts at age 2.5, 3, and can go all the way to about 10. You can use words, or you can use pictures. They get to go to that center, then they get to go to this center, then they get to have lunch. They get to put them in the order that they want at school, and then Daddy comes home at 5, and so they can check these off. Done. I'm closer to getting to see Daddy. That's sometimes a reward, sometimes it's not. I'm closer to getting ice cream for dessert, whatever it is. But please don't promise them the Ferrari, because you start with a Ferrari in kindergarten, you're buying big stuff by the time they get to 4th grade. So start with the little things. What's something they get to do? If every Friday night you're going out for pizza, let them choose what's on the pizza. Let them choose the restaurant, and that's the reward if they make it through the day as they rip off as they go, and that's why Velcro is such a wonderful thing. So think of visual timers visual displays for your children. It sometimes helps them. Many of our kids ask every day, I need to see the schedule. Where's the schedule? We have to have it posted in every room. Your home can also have a schedule posted. What does he do when? Is anybody having issues like that at home? Do you see, I got to know what I'm doing? I see a lot of nods. This is what we deal with every single day. So come up with little things like this. Next year, I'm bringing all of it from Michael's, and we're going to have a make it and take it at midnight. We'll have so much fun. The next is a reward chart. And all we're doing, outstanding, great day, ready to learn, stop and think, uh-oh. And the uh-oh is where we don't want to get. We're all starting in the middle of the day. You start this at home at 2 and 3, and you send this to school, your teacher's going to be buying you groceries. She's going to think you walk on water because it's already a plan that he understands. But most people are so out of it dealing with everything else you have to deal with. They don't start this early. And then it takes us 3 or 4 months to figure it out. And then the school year's half over. So let's start on a positive. Make some kind of a chart at home. We're going to start out, if this is at home, ready to have a great day. Ready to have a great day? If we have to clip down because we didn't do what mommy said, we're clipping down. If we get to uh-oh, when daddy comes home, it is a bad day. But if we get to clip up to a great day, if we make it all the way to the top, what are we going to get to do? Remember, it's not the Ferrari. The top is we're going somewhere, or at nap time we don't have to sleep, or at dinner time you only have to eat 2 bites of vegetables. So that's kind of cool. I like the vegetables. So, okay, let me make sure here. I don't want to be off on our time. All right. Visual, weighted blankets, visual timers, clip charts, incentive plans. Now, you look at this, and I always say, well, to get through a week of PMS, you know what that's like, men. Sorry. Ladies, we know what it's like as well. But when we try to get through something in our life and we're just about done in, kids are feeling that same way. You make a sticker chart. It just complements this. Anything you can do to make his life at home positive is all we need to do. Now, the best is when we go to school and we say, you're having a bad day, Johnny. Do you want to call mommy? No, I don't want to call mommy. That's the goal we want. But this is what most kids say to us. Yeah, I want to call mommy. My mommy loves when I'm at home. My mommy wants me at home. My mommy wants me to come home now. No, she doesn't. So, you know what that's like. Yes, but they think that. So, again, on your little visual chart, you have to say, we come home before here, mommy's angry. And let them know that so that they can see through their entire day. And then all of a sudden, we've dealt with the behavior. We have cured so many people. A mom came in having bad days. We said, be the wicked witch. And she's like, I don't think I can do that. We said, you can. Promise, you have it in you. And that night they had a talk. He had a perfect day the next day, one day. She literally left our parking lot crying. She said, why didn't any other school tell me this? I said, because we're a school of all children with language delays and a little bit on the spectrum. So we know this. We've done this for 20 years. It took us 20 years to figure it out. But now you can be ahead of the game. All right, follow through. If you promise and you've made it, you gotta follow through. And then you talk to your loved husband and you say, we were a little rough on him. Tomorrow we'll change this, but you gotta follow it through. He went to bed hungry. I promise you, it's okay. One night of going to bed hungry is fine. So now we go to eating. You have a plate at home. This is part of the problem at school because they don't eat at school. And then what do? As soon as lunch is over, they melt down. And we've lost them for the day because they don't have any protein in them. And you're only letting them eat chicken nuggets. That's what they tell us. My mommy only likes me to eat chicken nuggets. I don't think so, but that's okay. Tell me what you want to tell me. And this goes all the way up through age 10. We hear it all the time. My mom says I shouldn't eat anything but chicken nuggets. So if you're catering to him at home and only feeding him chicken nuggets, we're at a loss at school. And so at 12:10, I've lost him for the rest of the day. And so then we have, again, learning problems at school because we're not going to get through the day. On your plate at home, and this is where OTs and speech paths can help you with eating and feeding. There's 3 bites. You only have to try 1 pea. You only have to try 1/4 of a bite of the chicken parmesan I have instead of your chicken nugget. And you only have to try 1 bite of that potato. The smallest bite, if they eat all 3 bites, they can have their chicken nuggets. Tomorrow the bite's a little bigger. 3 bites, and you do it on a regular plate, so they only see 3 little bites. That's all they have to get through. And it can be as small as a pencil tip to start with, because it's accomplishment. And the next day, it's bigger and bigger. At school, you have to go in and say, we're struggling with eating, and if you could do this, you send it in with saran covered, they're going to do it for you. But you just tell them, we don't know what we're doing with the food, it's not going to help. So start it at home and transfer it to school. All right, now, IEPs are great. They give you one, but I call it hooked on phonics. If in our generation you ordered hooked on phonics, it was going to cure your kid. They were going to be able to read overnight because you paid for hooked on phonics. It was $126, and you paid for it so your child's going to read. Not so true. So you have to use the hooked on phonics in order for your child to learn it. The IEP the same way. If you kill that teacher with kindness, they're going to send home what they didn't understand, and then you're going to do it at home, and voila, it's going to be fixed. And better yet, if you have a lovely volunteer from your church or your neighborhood that would come in a half hour a day and work with them instead of mommy. Let mommy be the cuddle bug. That's even better. Maybe an older brother and sister. Sometimes that works, and sometimes it is a disaster. Summer is catch-up time. Ask that teacher that you've kissed up to. You've bought her $5 little Starbucks gift card here and there. You've written her wonderful notes. You've wrapped Hershey candy bar. It doesn't have to be a lot, but every week you've thanked her in some way or another. She is going to make you a plan for summer of fun things you can do, yet academics to catch up for your next school year. The things that you need to watch for that we all forget. Pencil grips. It's harder than heck to hold one of those little tiny thin pencils, and you're going to notice it, and your PT or your OT can help you with this. Pencil grips make it wider, thicker, and easier to hold. If we still can't get the grip of a pencil, we have the Dictator. The Dictator's at Costco for $49, and they'll learn to dictate instead of writing, and a lot of teachers will work with that. So ask, again, to be outside the box. Can't we talk instead of write? And bumpy seats. Bumpy seats, we wiggle so much at school, and we're all over the place, and everything we do, we can't sit still. Practice at home. But a bumpy seat go on eBay. They're always there. Parents try it and they forget it and they sell it on eBay. A bumpy seat is a little cushion, and it wouldn't fit in my suitcase. And all you do is sit on it, and it just lets you wiggle the whole time you're in that classroom. And it helps you stay in your seat a little bit longer with that ADHD or that processing issue that you're not getting it, so you don't pay attention. And so you can wiggle the whole time. So pay attention to those little things that you can have for your school situation. Now, everything else is pretty much things that I would have to work with you one-on-one, and I'd love to meet with each and every one of you if you'd like to. And I have some things that I would be glad to email to you. So if you want to sign up, I will meet with you all day today, tomorrow, and Saturday. And that's about it. Good luck. I'll be here for you.
And some of the things I bought were directly for a teenager to bribe her to stay at my house. Just saying. Now we have Dr. Buder again, who's going to talk about taking care of ourselves as parents and how we really need to think about ourselves and place ourselves first some of the time, or a good deal of the time, so that we're healthy enough to be good parents.
Thanks, Pat. That was also a great presentation. Fantastic. I'd take her up on that offer to sit with her. So I'm going to try to save some time for questions, so I'll try to hit the highlights here. I'm using the word acceptance twice in what I think is a binary response to a pediatric disease diagnosis like Duchenne. And one time acceptance is less adaptive, and the next time it's more adaptive. You can avoid and accept. There are things I just cannot change. Let me just accept this and not really think about yourself as a warrior. That leads to a pattern of withdrawal. I think the parents that are most successful, who are most successful in helping their children, are parents who have an approach and attack, where this kind of perspective allows you to support a pattern over the long term, where you have acceptance and commitment to do the next thing you have to do, whether it's fight a school with an IEP that's effective, fight a school for the right kinds of accommodations or needs that you need in the classroom, or whether it's just to get a night out with your partner and let one of those volunteers come into your home to babysit, right? Whatever you're committing to next, the next thing you have to do to take care of yourself, to take care of your son, that's what should follow acceptance. Acceptance should not lead you to withdrawal. The basic point here is parent functioning is important. Kids are like little sponges. They absorb the energy and the mood around them. If your mood is anxious, scared, angry, they're probably going to pick up on that. They're going to be like that. It's going to increase their irritability. What we know in pediatric psychology is that child and parent reports are often not consistent. Children report one kind of functioning, parents report another. What do parents report that might be inaccurate? Well, we know that when parents are stressed, anxious, depressed, sad, angry, hostile, they are more likely to underreport a child's functioning. They don't see the upsides. They don't see a child growing and developing and changing. And then you go into your doctor, maybe you're in a clinical trial, maybe your doctor's just tried a new medicine, and you're underreporting their functioning. They might adjust your treatment in a way that is not beneficial if the report isn't accurate. And then parents also tend to over-report their problem. If you're not taking care of yourself, you're going to be giving an inaccurate report of what the problems are that your child's facing. And we know that then this impacts the child's functioning overall. So self-care is important. Go to Cincinnati like Pat did, or whatever nearby town you want to do your shopping spree in. I'm going to say a lot more about self-care in the context of managing anger as an emotion, because anger is usually the way that lots of other emotions get expressed. But for here, right now, let me just say the more structure and routine you can build in your life, the more habits you can create that are productive and efficient for you, the stronger and more metal your mind is going to be, the healthier and more sustained your wellness will be. A slight diversion, let me just say something about medical trauma. Pediatric medical trauma stress refers to the reaction that children and their families may have to pain, injury, serious illness, the news of a difficult diagnosis. It can also refer to invasive medical procedures and treatments that are sometimes frightening. This is all part of your care package. There are things that you're going to face from one time or another. The impacts are great. Parent self-reported trauma is typically higher than child self-report. You're going to experience this more deeply. Your heart is going to be in some ways more wounded than even your child's. And we know that parental trauma leads to hypervigilance, overprotection. I think it's hard to be the wicked witch at home at night if your desire is to always protect your child. If you're not managing your reaction to your child's medical care and the trauma that you're experiencing in this context, you'll be preoccupied with the disease to the exclusion of other things in your life, and you certainly won't be able to take care of yourself. The majority of families, in some studies, really report experiencing significant trauma. Again, we don't really know. We haven't done this research in Duchenne yet. I think we need to. But in other pediatric chronic medical conditions, medical trauma, and its impact on families is pretty significant. It can impact your child's willingness to go in to see the doctor or to participate in an upcoming hospitalization. It could increase fear that you have about your child's medical care. It might shut down treatment options that you're too afraid to try. Let me say something about anger. It's a common experience. We all get angry. You've all had road rage before, probably. You've been angry on your way here, maybe at TSA or at the ticket counter at the airplane. It is one of the first and usually the strongest emotions after receiving medical news that leaves you with broken dreams. Whether it's cancer or cystic fibrosis or a traumatic brain injury, it shows up in all of our research as probably the most significant parental experience. It begins to frame self-doubt and questions like, why him, why us, why me? And anger can be all-consuming, it can be overwhelming. It masks other more complicated feelings. Anger is a primitive emotion. We, again, are social animals with really complex minds. Our emotions are far more complex than just anger. Underneath anger might be uncertainty, might be guilt. I bet you if I sat down with any one of you, I would find 5 or 6 different really complicated emotions that you experienced in the minutes, days, weeks after you received the diagnosis. Labeling those emotions and talking about those more complicated emotions are far more healthier for you and your marriage and your family relationships and your friendship relationships than just being angry. When you're hostile, when you have more road rage, when you're more angry at your spouse, when one of your other kids doesn't make their bed or put their book bag up on a hook and you're just hostile about it, that's a red flag for you that perhaps you're not managing your anger, that your anger is misdirected. So what is good self-care? Well, the usual things that you see on Oprah: exercise, diet, and sleep, right? Stress management, learning how to relax, participating in mindfulness activities, yoga. Have a hobby. What did you used to like to do before you got married and had kids? Were you an aquariumist? Did you like to bicycle? Did you like to hike? Were you a photographer? What's that thing you did in college as an activity? Find your old hobby, right? Friendships have to be nurtured, especially in adulthood. We let most of our friends go. You're going to need more friends. Go find your old friends. Let them know explicitly, I want to reinvest. I want to spend time with you. I want to make time for you. Go do good deeds. Volunteer with your children at the senior citizen home down the street. Participate in a litter pickup. Go do good deeds. Doing good deeds helps us manage our own negative emotions about other things. And find gratitude. Keep a gratitude journal. Every day, what are you grateful for? You have a lot of things to be angry about, but you also have a lot of things to be grateful for. Spend time thinking about that. And one of the most powerful recommendations you can make is keeping a gratitude journal. Let me end with just some comments about marriage. I realize that there are a lot of different kinds of families, and maybe not everyone in here is currently married, and maybe no one will be getting married. But you might be in an intact marriage at the moment, and you might be single and looking to date. Maybe you have a Match.com profile, I'm not sure. But I want to say something about marital function, because I think it's really important to comment on this. One, in our society, divorce is very common for everyone. We recognize that, again, not all families are traditional. So if this doesn't hit you, I'm sorry about that. But when you're dealing with a chronic disease like Duchenne, there is significant risk for strain in a marriage. It's a complicated disease. It takes a lot of medical decisions. There's a lot of shared decision-making you're going to have to make with your physicians. And sometimes you're not always going to agree with your partner. That stress, that strain, those tasks, I think, increase. We know from the literature and other chronic disease populations, increases the risk for divorce. So, how can you be a dynamic duo? How can you do your best to stay healthy in your relationship? And I don't know if this works. I made it up. But let me, and I made it up in part by talking to families from my own clinical work and from a very inspiring conversation that I had with Pat back in March. I thought a lot about our conversation. Each of you are going to respond to this diagnosis in your own way. You're going to respond to the next medical decision you got to make in your own way. Each parent will approach this and respond differently than the other. You might be out of sync with each other. So what do? You could let the disease divide you. Know that it can do that. Expect it. It's extreme stress that you should expect. So how can you prevent it? I think this. Be real with each other. Be willing to have discussions, dialogue, debate. We can have differences of opinions. How is a dialogue different than a discussion? Discussion is, I might talk over you, I might interrupt you. A dialogue is, okay, like a script for a movie. It's my turn to talk. I have things I'm going to say. This is this part of this conversation. This is what we're talking about. Then you're going to get the floor and you're going to get to talk. It's okay to have a dialogue and sometimes a discussion. Sometimes it's okay to have a debate. A debate isn't a fight. A debate is we're going to be emotional and hot, but I still love you. Right? Be deliberate. Disciple. Go talk to other people. Find parent mentors who've been through this before. Maybe you don't have a parent mentor in your hometown, but maybe there's somebody else who's dealt with something that is just as likely to divide their family. Disciple with other people. Discern. What are our decisions that we got to make? What can we postpone? Let's focus on the only most important thing we got to do right now. Let's not try to solve all our problems all at once. It's okay to diverge. You can be in different places. You can have different thoughts. You can make a decision and not approve of the decision that was made. Distract. Don't always talk about this. Don't always fight about it. Don't always dialogue about it. Talk about President Trump. Talk about something else, right? Sometimes you got to make a decision. Your medical team's going to need a decision. That's okay. What you don't do is disintegrate. If divorce comes, it comes, but don't let the disease be the reason you're getting a divorce. Let it be because he's a jerk. In the end, you got to deliver for your family. Deliver for your son with Duchenne. Deliver for your other children. Deliver for your parents, grandparents of your son. You have to deliver for your family. And so I just encourage you to take care of yourselves and think about how you can be a dynamic duo. That's all I got. Thanks. One final thought. I'll let you read this quote, but I did a survey because Pat asked me to. I talked to a bunch of pediatric psychologists around the country. This woman who gave me this quote is one of our leading psychologists. She's written dozens and dozens, hundreds of articles in our field across multiple disease populations. She has been the journal editor for some of our flagship journals in the field. I won't tell you her name, but she's embarrassed that our field is not doing more for Duchenne. So this is just a start. I hope you see smarter and more informed people than me at this podium in future years. Thank you.
Thank you both. I think you are wonderful, and I appreciate the quote because I think we have so focused on skeletal muscle and function and walking and walking and walking and walking until this age and that age and forever that we forget that these little human brains and our families need to stay tightly knit. So I think that I really appreciate both of you coming, and I didn't buy what she said I bought because my husband's in the audience, so please ignore that piece. So if you have questions, let's take some questions and then we'll go to lunch. Any questions?
I'm not sure where this question would be directed to, but my question is when to give the diagnosis to your son, because at this point, our son has been having physical therapy for gross motor delays since he was 1.5 years. This is his life. This is what he knows. This is what our family knows. There's no question of why do we do this? It's just what we do. And when we started medication, why do we do it? Because it's what we do. That's been our answer, and that has been sufficient. And I'm hesitant to label it because I don't want it to be something that holds him back in any way, and I don't want him to see it as a disease or something that is wrong. It's just something that is different, and that's okay to be different. And so I don't know, where to take it from there.
I think that's one of the hardest things, to say Duchenne out loud, and when your son says what's wrong, to say it. So I'll let it up to you.
I really appreciate the question, and it highlights why I think we, as pediatric psychologists, need to be much more involved in this process, because that kind of question is something that I would love to have helped you start thinking about at the moment you receive the diagnosis. It strikes me that you've done the hard work already. You've helped him appreciate having this just be part of his life, not define who he is. I don't think labeling it, giving it a name, is going to undo all that very good work you've done, which is this is how we're living, this is how we're surviving, and a lot of times we're thriving through this. And the reason we've done all these things is because you have this diagnosis called Duchenne. And I would say whenever you feel ready to do that, it's time. From my perspective, there's an enemy here. It's the disease, and it's just part of him. It's not who he is. And in some ways, you've already done that work. I'm repeating myself, but my answer to your question is spend time getting ready, and I think it's going to not be anything that really changes his world because of what you've already done.
Do you think it's important for children to know the name of their diagnosis at a certain point?
I think the struggle with not labeling it is that someday you will. Someday you just will. It will, when he's 10, when he's 12, when he's 15, when he's 16, when his world and his mind are so much more complex. And then that's a different dynamic than if it was named earlier. I'm not sure there's any particular value in giving the name, but the reason we're not doing it is because it's hard for us. I'm not sure because it's hard for him to hear. It will be hard for him to hear that we haven't given it a name until we have to at age 13 or 14 or 15 when he asks, right? So I think it's much better for you to be in control of that than necessarily let time be the monster here. Maybe the only other thing I'd say is that certainly if he asks, answer. Right? So when I say when you're ready, I mean your whole family, and he might be ready because he may say, why are we doing this? Or when he begins to learn, he has increasing health literacy through, I'm not sure how old your son is, but at age 8 or 9, we see an increase in health literacy and significant increases in health literacy at age 10 and 12, where kids start to own their medical care a lot more. They start to ask those questions. What do I have? Why am I doing this? And when they ask that question, that's the time to be authentic, absolutely. Before then, I think you have time to evaluate when you're ready.
Denise?
That's what I was going to say. Sometimes it's the Santa Claus is what we call it. When they come to you, Mom, you didn't tell me you were the Santa. It comes for us for an autistic diagnosis. The kids come to us right around the age of 8, sometimes 10, and they ask us. And it sometimes starts at school, and then we tell the parents that it came out that other children told him that he has autism. So if it comes out like that, we always tell the parents, have a heart-to-heart. And we always have a parent workshop around age 6 and 7 to say, it's coming, get ready for it.
Question?
While she's approaching the podium, I'll just reiterate what a great analogy the Santa Claus motif is. I remember when I was a kid, I came home from 3rd grade, and the kids at school told me there was no Santa Claus, and I came home and I said, you lied to me, you lied to me. I got over it within a minute. But it's that moment that I think is really important to negotiate. So I'm happy to talk to you more privately if you want.
My name's Jenny Fryer. I have identical twins.
Jane, speak up into the mic, or pull it down to you, if you don't mind. Thank you.
My name's Jenny Fryer, and I have identical twins who've just turned 40. Christopher, who's the eldest by 5 minutes, has got glossomycemia, which means he can't speak anymore. This is causing a lot of problems with Chris, he's become very withdrawn. He's getting depressed. I try and help him, and I said, do you want to go and see a psychologist? Why I can't talk? And I don't know what to do anymore.
So just to explain, the tongue is a muscle as well. And sometimes when boys are young or older, they concentrate, or some of us study or concentrate, and we let our tongue hang out of our mouth. So the tongue is a muscle, and it will elongate. And it will sometimes elongate to the point that it occludes the mouth. It really interferes, as you might imagine, with swallowing and with speaking. So as often the men that get to be 40 years old, sometimes we see that in them. It really is socially difficult for them to be outside. It further isolates them. Yeah. And I don't know about I'll let that up to you all to talk about what you might or how you might approach that.
Yeah, it strikes me that finding a therapist, some psychologist who, as Denise said earlier, can think out of the box. Of course, talk therapy is talk therapy, but there are different ways of communicating. And if your son can still nod, I think a therapist can accept that challenge to work with him on trying to find the right meaning for his life right now. And that's the most we can ask for, really, out of any moment in time for any of us, is, how am I making the most of this moment right now, given the challenges that I've been dealt with? And that takes, when someone is depressed, it takes deep and committed work and the love and nurturance of a therapeutic relationship. But you're right, finding the therapists who are going to be willing to be that creative is challenging. But I think if you know what you're asking for, send the saran wrap plate so the teachers use the plate and teach the kid how to eat food. This, as an adult, is I need this for my son. Be his advocate and see if you can find that therapist. Maybe you have to go through 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 interviews before you find one who's willing to give it a try. But I certainly have dealt with moms in very different situations with children who have come to me after being sort of rejected from uncreative therapists at other sites for work with their kids, particularly kids who are minimally verbal with autism, about how to help them. And I have found creative ways to, and I don't always succeed, but I'm willing to give it a try. And I would encourage you to keep shopping, try to get them help.
I think the other thing you have to remember is when you have little ones and they're asking about a diagnosis, when you say the word out loud, when you finally get yourself to the point, and I think it took me years to say the word Duchenne out loud, you have to remember that they haven't searched Google. So their understanding is exactly what you give them, right? So they're not going to see a prognosis, and they're not going to be worried about what's going on. And I always come back to a time when my son Patrick was asking me things, right, about the future. And I didn't really know how to answer. When it really came down to it, he was asking me what was happening Friday night and would he be able to go to the movies with his friends. So I think answering the question and knowing that they aren't looking at the bigger picture that we might have may sometimes make it a little bit easier to say that word out loud. Another question? Sure. Can you come up to the microphone? Would you mind? Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Looking the wrong direction. We'll take.
Hi, mine's not a question. I'm Hillary Zeberman. I'm the social worker at UCLA. And in terms of losing speech and not being able to communicate, there's other ways of communication, and to find a competent speech therapist or outpatient facility to do assessments, and maybe even looking at eye gazing equipment, where you can use your eyes through a computer to communicate, like many other people do with other neuromuscular diseases, has been really, really helpful. So I just wanted maybe to suggest that people explore that.
Good, thank you. And Jenny, you too need to talk as well. All right.
Okay.
Last question? Or several. We can take a few more questions.
I'm sorry, I don't have a question. I just wanted to speak on you and talking about your son. I'm not a doctor or anything, but I've been in this journey with my son. He's now 8, and he was diagnosed at 20 months old. And as I've gone through the journey and spoke to older boys that are actually in their 20s, I think it's harder on us as parents to deal with the diagnosis and the disease as the kids are younger than it is for them. And we worry more about how they're going to cope or deal with certain situations or the disease and what it is and how to speak about it. And I learned early on that informing my son, not to, the disease, when you look online and read the prognosis, it is, how do I explain this? It doesn't mean that that's the end of the line. We've come so far with trials and medication that we don't know what the outcome's going to be at this point. We know what it's been in the past, but your son might get a medication that's going to cure him. I don't know how old he is. 5. And so my son, he's 8. I've never given him an end-of-the-line date. He knows what Duchenne is, and it actually was more of, he felt empowerment. Now I can talk to people about it. Now I know why my muscles are different, but it's never made him feel as if he's less of. Now I can explain to people how to take care of me better, Now I can tell them, this is what I have, this is how this works, and this is who I am, and, it's always been a positive thing for him, so I'm not speaking on all boys, but that's how he is, and that's how a lot of his friends with Duchenne are, and the older ones as well. They felt very empowered when they knew that, hey, I can talk about what I have, and it's okay, because it doesn't make me who I am. It's just something that I have to deal with. And, we figure out ways to do things. And, they've been dealing with it since they were little. Like, he's been taking medicine since he was 2, So we found out early on. And he's very empowered and talks, advocates for himself. So just I'm trying to say, don't try to think of it as always negative. It's harder for us because, we're moms. So, just.
Thank you. Do we have one last question?
Hi, my son has some cognitive delays, and he's had an IEP since he started school, and of course, he's in the public schools. We're actually thinking about holding him back for 2nd grade, so having him repeat 2nd grade. And the school system has actually put up a lot of resistance to this idea, and they've actually commented that there's research out there that suggests that holding your child back doesn't help. Can you comment on if you believe this is true? And
Yeah, generally we would recommend against retention. It has more negative social consequences than positive academic consequences. And one of the questions that you might want to think about is, what are they going to do in 2nd grade differently this time than they did last time? And is there if there are differences that they're going to do this time, why not make those accommodations and adjustments in 3rd grade and keep him with his cohort and his peers that he's familiar with and may be comfortable with? Now, if social adjustment is less of an issue, if you feel like actually, it might be a benefit for him to be with 2nd graders again for whatever reason, it might be worth considering. But on the whole, in aggregate, yes, the data points to retention not being a positive thing for kids in the academic setting. But it's always an individual choice, and we should be precise about making the right decision for your son. And I certainly, I think either one of us would be willing to sit and talk with you and help you think about that a little bit more. But they're giving you generally good advice. Whether or not it's the best advice for your son, I'm not sure.
Denise, you want to comment?
Again, social emotional. Our children at our school functioning at the academic level, they're still socially behind. So every once in a while, it's a great move to hold them back, but it's an every once in a while just because of the social emotional. And a lot of times, again, repetition for us, a lot of times is just 1 hour, one-on-one, all summer long, every day, sometimes can make all the difference. So I'd be glad to sit down and look at where he is with you and give you some more specific guidance on that.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Okay, well, thank you very much for sitting this morning. These sessions were really for new diagnoses, and we begin again. So lunch is served outside, and then at 1 o'clock we begin in the full session and open the official conference. Thank you again.